No one dies outside my house. She said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. 6 massive men covered in snow and ice stood at her door past midnight, one of them unconscious and turning blue. And Evelyn Harper, 74 years old, 5'2", alone in a farmhouse with a leaking roof and a pension that barely covered her groceries, opened that door wide and said it again. Now get him inside before we lose him. If you're new here, subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The wind had been building since mid-afternoon, and by 10 o'clock that Tuesday night in November, Silver Creek, Montana had disappeared entirely beneath it. Not slowed down, not inconvenienced. Disappeared. The kind of storm that didn't announce itself politely. It arrived the way catastrophe always does, faster than anyone expected, and worse than the forecast promised. The Highway Patrol had closed Route 12 at 7. By 8, the county roads were gone under 2 feet of new snow, with more falling at a rate that made the plows useless. By 9, the power went out across most of the valley, and Silver Creek's 943 residents did what mountain people do when the world shuts down around them. They pulled their families close, stacked wood by the fireplace, and thank God they were already home. Evelyn Harper was not afraid of the dark. She had lived in that farmhouse for 41 years, and she had weathered storms that would have broken people half her age. She knew exactly where every candle was kept, exactly how much firewood she had stacked on the back porch, exactly how long it would take the old cast iron wood stove in the kitchen to heat the downstairs rooms to something close to comfortable. She moved through the powerless house with the practiced calm of a woman who had stopped needing electricity to feel safe a long time ago. What she needed was her husband. But Robert Harper had been gone 11 years, and Evelyn had learned slowly, painfully, and completely how to need him without being undone by it. She kept his wool hunting blankets folded in the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. She kept his photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. She kept the habit he'd given her of checking on the neighbors before she checked on herself, even when checking on the neighbors meant driving 4 miles in the dark to leave a bag of groceries on someone's porch and driving back before they could thank her. Tonight, there was no driving anywhere. Tonight, she lit 3 candles in the kitchen, put a pot of the last of her homemade vegetable stew on the wood stove to heat, and sat down at the kitchen table with her husband's old Bible and the specific kind of quiet that belongs only to people who have learned to be alone with themselves without running from it. She was on the 3rd chapter of Job when the first sound reached her. She stopped her reading. It wasn't the wind. She knew every register of that wind, the low moan around the eaves, the sharp crack of frozen branches, the whistle that came through the gap in the mudroom door that Robert had always meant to seal and never got to. This was something else. A vibration more than a sound, low and mechanical, cutting underneath the storm. Engines. She set the Bible down carefully and went to the front window. Through the heavy curtain of falling snow, she could see the faint pulse of headlights, not one pair but multiple moving slowly along what used to be the road in front of her property, moving and then stopping, moving again and then stopping for longer. She watched for a moment, not frightened, just paying attention the way Robert had taught her to pay attention to everything the land tried to tell you. Then the headlights went out, and 30 seconds later, someone knocked on her door with a fist that shook the frame. Evelyn Harper did not go for the phone. She did not go for the shotgun Robert had left her in the closet that she hadn't touched in 6 years. She went for the door because in 74 years of living, she had learned that the kind of knock that sounds desperate at midnight in a blizzard does not belong to anyone who means you harm. It belongs to someone who is running out of time. She opened the door. The man standing on her porch was enormous. Not just tall, but broad in the way that suggested his body had been built by actual labor, rather than a Jim with a silver-streaked beard and snow caked so thick on his shoulders and his leather cut that he looked like something that had grown up out of the storm itself. Behind him on the porch stood 4 more men, all of them equally large, equally frost-covered, and all of them holding up a 6th man between them, whose head was hanging and whose lips had gone the particular gray-blue that Evelyn recognized immediately because Robert had treated enough winter emergencies in his years as a forest ranger that he had taught her exactly what that color meant. She did not scream. She did not slam the door. She looked at the unconscious man's face for exactly 2 seconds, and then she looked at the big man in front of her, and she said it. No one dies outside my house. The big man, she would learn his name later, would learn all their names later, but in that first moment, he was just a man with ice in his beard, and desperation in his eyes stared at her for a beat, like he was waiting for the part where she changed her mind. She stepped back from the doorway and opened it wider. Now get him inside before we lose him. They moved fast, all five of them, with the coordinated efficiency of men who had handled emergencies together before. They carried the sixth man through the door and into the narrow front hallway, and Evelyn pointed without hesitation toward the living room where the fireplace was already burning and said, "Floor, right in front of the fire. Keep him elevated on this side." She pulled a chair cushion off the armchair without waiting for anyone to help and slid it under the unconscious man's legs herself. The big man with the beard followed her lead without question. That told her something. "How long was he outside?" she asked, already moving toward the seat, her chest already calculating. 40 minutes since the crash, the big man said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, quieter. "Probably another 20 before that, trying to help a family that went off the road. We got the family out. He went down trying to get back to his bike, and we couldn't get to him fast enough." "What's his name?" "Luke." "How old?" 26. Evelyn opened the cedar chest and pulled out Robert's heaviest wool blanket, the one from their trip to Wyoming in 1987, that she had washed and folded and stored like it was a sacred thing, and she brought it to the young man on her floor without a moment's hesitation. "Luke," she said, and she said it firmly, not gently, the way you say a name to someone you need to stay present. "Luke, you're inside now. You're going to be warm. I need you to try." He didn't respond. His breathing was shallow and his skin was cold to the touch in a way that went deeper than surface cold. "We need to call for medical help," the big man said. "Phone's been out since 9, Evelyn said. "Roads are completely closed. We're what he's got right now." She looked up at the big man directly for the first time and held his gaze. "Tell me your name." He paused for half a second, not with suspicion, she realized later, but with the particular hesitation of someone who wasn't used to being asked that question by someone who wasn't afraid of him. "Hunter," he said, "grizzly on the road, but Hunter." "Hunter," she repeated. "My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm going to need your help tonight. Can you do that?" He looked at her. He looked at her the way people rarely look at elderly women, because they have already decided elderly women are the backdrop to other people's stories. And something shifted in his face that she couldn't quite name but recognized as the moment a person decides to trust. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Whatever you need." The other men introduced themselves in the brief, practical way of people in the middle of a crisis road, names offered like tools rather than pleasantries. Crow, who was the quietest and had the quickest hands. Diesel, who was enormous, even by the standards of the other large men in the room, and who moved with surprising gentleness. Rex, who had a scar across his chin and kept checking on Luke every 30 seconds without being asked. Bo, who was the youngest of the 5 conscious men and who kept looking at Evelyn with an expression she recognized, the look of someone trying to figure out whether what he was seeing was actually real. "Where are your bikes?" Evelyn asked while she gathered what she needed from the kitchen. "End of your drive," Hunter said. "We couldn't push them further in the snow. We were trying to make it to Silver Creek proper when Luke's temperature started dropping too fast. Your lights were the only lights we could see." She thought about that as she moved. One candle in the kitchen window. She always put one in the window when the power went out. Another habit from Robert, a holdover from some older instinct about letting people know a house was inhabited and warm. One small candle and it had been enough. "There's a barn behind the house," she said, "old but solid. Better than leaving them in this." Hunter looked at Crow and nodded, and Crow and Bo headed back out into the storm without being asked twice to move the bikes. "You don't have to do that," Hunter said to her, watching her layer blankets over Luke with methodical precision. "I know I don't," she said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. What she did instead was work. Evelyn Harper had grown up the daughter of a practical woman in a practical house in a part of Montana where practical was not a personality trait but a survival skill. And she had spent 41 years married to a man whose job was literally to keep people alive in conditions that wanted to kill them. She knew how to treat hypothermia. She knew it from Robert's ranger manuals that she'd read alongside him over decades of dinners from the Red Cross course she'd taken 3 times since his death because she felt safer knowing things from the specific and unglamorous reality of having warmed her husband's hands herself on 3 separate occasions when his shift had run long in January and his circulation had suffered for it. She knew what Luke needed: slow, controlled rewarming, dry clothes, Core heat first, not extremities. Warm liquids when he was conscious enough to swallow safely. Monitoring presence. She sent Diesel to the kitchen for the pot of stew on the wood stove, not because Luke could eat yet, but because the steam and the warmth of the pot would help raise the temperature of the room by a few degrees, and because Diesel needed something to do with his hands, or he was going to pace a hole in her floor. She sent Rex to the back porch for more firewood, 2 armloads, telling him exactly where the stack was and how to navigate the icy steps, and he went without question. She took Hunter with her upstairs to the linen closet because she needed more dry blankets, and she wanted to ask him something without an audience. "How long have you been riding in this storm?" she asked him on the landing, opening the closet. "Since about 4 this afternoon," he said. "We were supposed to be in Billings by tonight. Storm came up faster than forecast." "Where were you coming from?" A pause. "Colorado, annual ride. 7 of us started out. Luke was the last one down." She pulled blankets from the shelf and handed them to him without looking. "Were the others hurt?" "Cold, tired, nothing that won't pass." He shifted the blankets in his arms. "Mrs. Harper, you know who we are, right? You see the patch." It was not quite a question. She closed the linen closet door and looked at him in the candlelight. This large man with his snow-dampened beard and his leather cut with the death head emblem that she absolutely recognized because she had lived in Montana for over 4 decades, and she was 74, not naive. "I see it," she said, "and you let us in anyway." "I let you in because your friend was dying," she said, "and because it was the right thing to do." She picked up her candle from the top of the linen cabinet. "I'm going to tell you something my husband told me once, Hunter. He said the most dangerous assumption a person can make is deciding they already know who someone is before they have had to rely on them." She started back toward the stairs. "Come on, Luke needs those blankets." Hunter stood still on the landing for just a moment. Then he followed her. Luke began showing signs of returning consciousness around 1 in the morning. It was Rex who noticed first a slight increase in Luke's responsiveness when his name was called, the beginnings of shivering, which was actually a good sign the body's engines starting to fight back. Evelyn confirmed what she was seeing and allowed herself a quiet private exhale that she didn't let anyone else observe. "He's going to be okay," she said. "He's going to need to stay warm and still, and he'll feel like hell tomorrow, but he's going to be okay." The relief that moved through the 5 men in her living room was palpable. It moved through the room like a physical thing, like a change in air pressure. Rex leaned his head back against the wall with his eyes closed. Crow put his hand briefly on Luke's shoulder. Diesel made a sound that was not quite a word. Bo, the youngest, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment that lasted long enough to say everything it needed to say. Hunter looked at Evelyn. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. But the weight behind them was not 2 words worth of weight. It was the weight of something that had been carried a long distance and set down finally in the right place. "Don't thank me yet," Evelyn said. "We still have a long night ahead of us." She wasn't wrong. The storm, rather than settling toward morning the way November storms in that part of Montana often did, decided instead to intensify somewhere around 2 a.m. The wind picked up to a register she could feel in her back teeth, and the temperature outside dropped another 8 degrees according to the thermometer Robert had mounted to the kitchen window frame in 1991, and the old farmhouse did what it always did. In extremity, it groaned and shifted and complained, and in 3 places it leaked. The first leak was over the kitchen door frame, which had been slowly separating from the wall for 2 years, and which Evelyn had been managing with a towel and a prayer. The second was in the corner of the dining room, where she'd already had a bucket permanently stationed. The third was new, or rather newly bad, a seam along the far bedroom ceiling that had been a damp spot last winter and had apparently graduated overnight to an actual drip. She found it when she went upstairs to get an extra candle. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment, looking at the steady drip falling onto the wooden floor, and she did the mental calculation she had been doing for 2 years. The calculation that ended with the number her pension produced versus the number a roof repair cost, and she felt the familiar hollow thud of that particular arithmetic. She got a pot from the back of the kitchen cabinet and put it under the drip. She did not say anything about it when she went back downstairs. But Hunter noticed the pot when he came upstairs to help her carry down the extra candles. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at the steady drip into the pot, and then looked at her, and she saw the question forming on his face. "Old house," she said simply. "When did it start leaking?" Oh, that one's new tonight. The kitchen door and the dining room have been going for a while. He looked at the pot. He looked at her. How long is a while? A while, she said, and picked up her candles and headed back to the stairs. She didn't want his pity. She didn't want anyone's pity. Pity was a thing that made people feel better about not helping, and she had been on the receiving end of enough well-meaning pity in the 11 years since Robert died to have formed a clear opinion about its uselessness. What she hadn't counted on was Hunter Mason being a man who was constitutionally incapable of observing a problem and not doing something about it. By 3 in the morning, while Evelyn sat with Luke and monitored his temperature and coaxed him toward alertness with quiet conversation, she became aware that the activity level in her house had quietly changed. The men had been respectful of her space all evening, careful with where they sat, careful with what they touched, the kind of careful that spoke of men who knew they were guests and were determined to behave like it. But sometime around 3, the careful shifted into something else. She heard Crow and Bo in the kitchen, and then the sound of what she recognized as the cabinet under the sink being opened, and then voices too low to make out words. She heard Diesel go out the back door and come back in twice in quick succession, and then the sound of something being moved in the mudroom. She looked at Hunter, who was sitting across from her near Luke's feet. "What are they doing?" she asked. Hunter leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees and looked at her, with the particular expression of a man who has made a unilateral decision and is not entirely sure how it will be received. "Crow used to do construction," he said. "Before." "Before what?" "Before he was Crow." A slight smile, the first one she'd seen from him. "He thinks he can get something over that kitchen door frame tonight with what's in your mudroom. You've got rubber weather seal tape and a staple gun and some scrap lumber." Evelyn stared at him. "He found all that in my mudroom." "He went looking," Hunter said. "I hope that's all right. He should have asked. I should have asked." She thought about telling him that it wasn't necessary, that she was fine, that she didn't need strangers rummaging through her mudroom in the middle of the night. She thought about all the ways that sentence could be true and was forming it into something she could say with dignity when Luke's hand moved. Not much, just his fingers tightening slightly against the blanket. She reached over and covered his hand with hers. "Luke," she said. His eyes didn't open, but his fingers tightened again just slightly. Response to sound, response to presence. She felt something unclench in her chest that had been clenched since the moment they'd laid him on her floor. "Tell Crow to be careful with my staple gun," she said. "The trigger sticks." Hunter's expression shifted into something that took her a moment to identify as gratitude, not for the staple gun instruction, but for what it meant, for her letting them do what they needed to do, for understanding that men like the men in her house sometimes showed what they felt with their hands instead of their mouths. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She stayed with Luke. Hunter stayed with her. Somewhere around 3:30, Luke opened his eyes. They were unfocused at first, the swimming, uncertain gaze of someone who has been very far away and is finding their way back, but they cleared within a minute into something that was actually seeing the room, seeing the fire, seeing Evelyn's face above him. "There you are," she said. He tried to say something. His voice came out as a thread. "Don't try too hard," she said. "You've had a rough night. You're safe now. You're inside and warm, and your friends are here." He blinked. He looked around the room as much as he could without moving his head, taking in the fireplace and the candles and the old furniture and the 6'2" man with the gray-streaked beard sitting across from him. "Grizzly," he said. The word barely made it out, but it made it. "Right here," Hunter said. "Take it easy." Luke's eyes came back to Evelyn. He studied her face for a moment with the earnest, unguarded attention of someone who hasn't yet remembered to be strategic about showing what they feel. His voice was still barely there. "You let us in. You needed to come in," she said, he seemed to be working at something. "You know who we are." "I know who you are right now," she said. "You're 6 men caught in a storm. That's enough for tonight." Luke looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face settled, not relaxed exactly, but resolved the look of someone who has decided to believe something. "Thank you," he said. It was the second time those 2 words had been said to her in the last few hours, and they didn't get lighter with repetition. They got heavier, not in a bad way, in the way that real things are heavy. "Get some rest," she said. "We'll talk in the morning." She stood up carefully. Her knees informed her of their opinion about 3:30 a.m., and kneeling on hardwood floors and went to the kitchen to check on the stew and see what Crow was doing to her doorframe. What Crow was doing to her doorframe was it turned out considerably better than anything Evelyn could have done herself. He had pulled the failing seal, entirely shimmed the frame with 2 pieces of scrap wood from the pile she kept in the mudroom for kindling, and was running weather tape along the seam with the focused attention of a man who genuinely loved fixing things. He looked up when she came in. She looked at the door frame. She looked at him. "You know what you're doing," she said. 15 years in construction, he said. He had a quiet way of speaking, each word placed precisely. "Before some other things. Before you were Crow." The corner of his mouth moved. "Before I was Crow." Evelyn pulled a chair to the kitchen table and sat down. She was tired in the specific bone-deep way of someone who has been running on adrenaline for hours and has just felt it start to recede. "What were you before?" she asked, not intrusively, the way she would have asked anyone sitting in her kitchen at 3:30 in the morning with a staple gun. Crow was quiet for a moment, pressing tape along the seam. "A husband," he said. "A father." A pause. "Then not those things anymore." Evelyn nodded. She understood that sentence completely. She understood every word of it. "And now you're Crow," she said. "And now I'm Crow." He looked at the door frame and ran his thumb along the edge of the tape to seal it. "Better than not being anything." "Yes," she said, "it is." They sat in the particular, comfortable silence of 2 people who have accidentally told each other something true and are at peace with having done so. Diesel appeared in the doorway, ducking slightly out of reflex for the frame, even though he didn't quite need to. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "your dining room bucket's getting full. Where do you want me to empty it?" She looked at him, this enormous man asking permission to empty her leaking roof bucket. "Back door down the porch steps left," she said, "and there's another bucket in the mudroom if you need it." He nodded seriously like she'd given him an important assignment and disappeared. Rex came in next, rubbing his hands together, smelling of cold air and pine from the firewood. "Got another 4 loads stacked in the mudroom," he said. "You've got plenty for tonight and maybe tomorrow morning too." He looked around the kitchen. "Is there anything else?" "Sit down," Evelyn said. "You've been up all night. Sit down." He sat down. Bo appeared in the doorway next to Rex's newly vacated space, and Evelyn noticed again the particular quality of the youngest man's gaze, that effortful attention like he was trying to record everything he was seeing. "Mrs. Harper," he said, and then stopped. "Yes, he seemed to be deciding something." "My mom is 71, he said. "She lives by herself too, outside of Bozeman." He swallowed. I don't think about it enough, whether she has wood or whether her roof leaks or..." He stopped again. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. "Call her in the morning," she said, "when the phones come back on. That's all, just call her." He nodded, his jaw was tight. He nodded again. "And sit down," she said. "There's stew on the stove." At 4 in the morning, Evelyn Harper's kitchen held 6 Hells Angels bikers in various states of exhaustion. 1 recovering hypothermia patient in the living room, a just repaired door frame, 2 emptied buckets, a restacked wood pile, and a pot of vegetable stew that she kept refilling from jars she'd canned herself last September. She had 3 jars left after tonight. She served the last of the bread she'd baked on Sunday, a loaf she'd been rationing through the week because her grocery run wasn't until Thursday and she'd been trying to make it last. Hunter watched her cut the bread. He had been watching her the way she'd noticed he watched everything, not intrusively, not obviously, but with the steady peripheral awareness of a man who was always cataloging his environment. She saw his eyes move from the bread to the pantry door, which she hadn't fully closed, and she knew he could see that the shelves were not full. She did not close the pantry door. She had nothing to be ashamed of. "This is good bread," Diesel said, and he meant it with his whole heart. "Thank you," Evelyn said. "Robert always said I made bread like someone who understood it was serious." "Robert was your husband?" Bo asked. 41 years, she said. The kitchen went quiet in a specific way. "When did you lose him?" Rex asked. 11 years ago, March, she said. "Heart attack. He was in the field." She set the bread knife down. "He was a forest ranger for 34 years. He died doing the job." The quiet changed quality again. "I'm sorry," Hunter said. He said it without the reflexive automaticity that people usually wrapped around those words. He said it like he meant the specific content of each word. "Thank you," she said, And then, because it was 4 in the morning and she was tired and the bread was almost gone and there was something about this specific night that felt outside the normal rules of what people said to strangers, he would have loved tonight. Hunter looked at her. He would have had you all at the kitchen table by midnight, she said. He would have had your whole life stories out of you before the stew was done. He was that kind of man. She picked up her cup of tea. The kind that assumed the best of people until they gave him a specific reason not to. Sounds like someone else in this kitchen, Crow said quietly. She looked at him. He was looking at his door frame repairs with an expression of professional assessment, not at her. She almost smiled. He taught me well, she said. At 5 in the morning, Luke called from the living room. Everyone in the kitchen moved at once, the coordinated, instinctive movement of a group of people for whom a change in a companion's status is a collective concern, and Evelyn was ahead of all of them, moving with the brisk economy of someone who had been watching for this moment. Luke was sitting up, not all the way up, propped on his elbows, the wool blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, but upright eyes clear present. He looked in the particular way of young men who have survived something that tried to take them simultaneously humbled and lit up from the inside. Hey, he said. Hey yourself, Evelyn said. Can you tell me your full name? Lucas James Petrie, he said. Born March 4th, 2000. Blood type B, positive. Currently located in the warmest and best-smelling house I have ever been in. He looked at her. How's that oriented times 3, she said. That'll do. I want to sit up more, he said. Give it another few minutes, she said. Your body has had a hard night. Let it catch up. He settled back onto the cushion but kept his eyes open and active. He looked at the men around him, counted them, seemed satisfied by the count. He looked around the room at the fireplace, at the candles burning low, at the old furniture, and the photograph on the mantel, and the slight worn smooth quality of a house that had been well loved for a long time by people who couldn't afford to replace things when they got old. Who lives here, he asked. I do, Evelyn said. Alone. He absorbed that. He looked at the fire and then back at her. Why'd you let us in? He asked. We come with a reputation. You came with a man who was going to die, she said. Everything else was secondary. Luke was quiet for a moment. Some people, he said carefully, would have made a different call. Some people have the luxury of making calls based on what they're afraid of, she said. I'm 74 and I live alone in a farmhouse in a blizzard. If I was going to let fear run my life, I'd have been done a long time ago. Luke looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Hunter. Grizzly, he said. She's something. Yeah, Hunter said. She is. Luke's eyes moved back to the photograph on the mantel. Who's that? He asked. My husband, Evelyn said. Robert. He's wearing a ranger uniform. He was a forest ranger. 34 years. Luke studied the photograph. There was something specific in his attention that Evelyn noticed, but didn't probe a quality of recognition or searching that seemed private. But before she could decide whether to ask about it, Hunter's head had lifted in the same moment, and she saw something cross his face, not quite the expression she'd have predicted, not surprise exactly, more like the specific quality of something long anticipated finally arriving. He was looking at the photograph. His face had gone very still. Mrs. Harper, Hunter said, and something in the way he said it made everyone in the room go quiet. His voice had changed register, not louder but deeper, more careful. The way a person speaks when they're about to say something that has been a long time getting said. What was your husband's name, his full name? Robert James Harper, she said. Why, Hunter was quiet for a very long moment. He was looking at the photograph on the mantel with an expression that Evelyn could not entirely read in the candlelight, but that she would later describe to herself as a man recognizing something he had spent a very long time looking for. Robert James Harper, he said, not as a question, as a confirmation. Hunter, she said, what is it? He looked at her, and the expression on his face, this large man, this road-worn man, this man who had ridden through a blizzard and held his injured friend and said thank you to a 74-year-old woman and meant every syllable of it, that expression was something she hadn't expected. It was the expression of someone who was about to be found. I think, he said slowly, that your husband saved my life. The candles burned, the fire crackled. Outside, the storm howled at a pitch that suggested it had no intention of stopping. And in the living room of a small farmhouse at the edge of Silver Creek, Montana, with the dawn still an hour away, and 6 road-worn men arranged around her worn furniture, Evelyn Harper sat very still and felt the specific sensation of the world rearranging itself around something she hadn't known was missing. "Tell me," she said. Hunter looked at his hands. Then he looked at the photograph. Then he looked at her. He had the look of a man choosing for the first time in a long time to tell the truth about something that mattered. "It was 1998, he said. "I was 23 years old and I was burning." "It was a wildfire," Hunter said, "and I was the kind of 23-year-old that nobody in their right mind should have gone back for." He said it without flinching, without the softening people usually apply to the worst versions of their younger selves. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed telling for a long time and has finally found the right room to say it in. Evelyn did not move. The fire crackled between them. Luke had pushed himself to sitting now, blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, watching Hunter's face with the careful attention of someone hearing a story he had never been told before, which meant it was a story Hunter almost never told. "I was running," Hunter said. "Not from the fire, from about 4 other things that had nothing to do with the fire. Warrants in 2 counties, a situation in Billings that had gone sideways. I was on a bike that wasn't mine on a road I didn't know in the Gallatin forest at 2 in the afternoon when the wind shifted." He looked at his hands again. They were large hands mapped with old scars that Evelyn hadn't examined closely until now. "You ever been near a wildfire when the wind shifts?" he asked her. Not rhetorically. He actually wanted to know. "Robert described it," she said. "He said it's like the fire decides." "That's exactly what it's like," Hunter said. "One minute there's smoke on the ridge far enough away and that a stupid 23-year-old can convince himself he's fine. Then the wind moves, and the fire doesn't approach. It arrives. It's just there on both sides of the road, and the road itself is gone in the smoke. And Anna..." He stopped, pressed his thumb against the scar on the back of his right hand. "My bike went down. I don't even know how. The smoke or the panic or both. I went into the drainage ditch off the side of the road and I couldn't get the bike up and I couldn't see and I could hear it." "The fire," Evelyn said. "The fire," he said. "It sounds like nothing you've heard before, like the air itself is being consumed." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought I was done. I was done. I was lying in a drainage ditch with a bike on my leg in the middle of a wildfire with warrants in 2 counties. And I genuinely thought, this is exactly what you deserve, Hunter. This is the precise and appropriate end of your story." Rex shifted in the corner. Crow was very still. Bo was looking at the floor. These were men who knew this part of Hunter's story, Evelyn realized. Not all of it, but enough of the shape of it to know what it had cost him to arrive at who he was now, from who he had been then. "And then," Hunter said, "somebody grabbed my arm." Evelyn's breath moved differently in her chest. "Not carefully," Hunter said. "Then, finally, this guy grabbed my arm like he was angry at me for being in that ditch, which honestly was the correct emotional response to the situation. He hauled me up and he got under my shoulder and he said..." Hunter stopped. He looked at the photograph on the mantel. He said, "I don't care what you've done or where you're going, you are not dying in my forest today. Now move your feet." The kitchen had gone completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Evelyn felt it go through her like a current, those words in her husband's voice, in the particular register Robert used when he had made a decision, and the decision was final, and the discussion was over. She had heard those words, or words shaped exactly like them, more times than she could count. Directed at her when she was sick and refused to rest. Directed at their daughter when she was 17 and testing limits. Directed at strangers in trouble on trails and roads across 3 decades of Forest Service. "I don't care what you've done or where you're going, you are not dying in my forest today." "That was Robert," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "He got me out," Hunter said. "Half a mile through smoke, so thick I couldn't see my own hand. He knew the road not because he could see it, but because he'd walked it enough times that it was in his body. He talked the whole way, didn't stop talking. I think it was partly to keep me moving and partly to keep himself oriented, but it worked. He got us both to the fire road where his truck was, and he pushed me into the passenger seat, and he drove us out." Hunter's voice was even and low and precise. He had burns on his forearms. I didn't notice until we were out. He'd taken burns going back in for me, and he didn't say a word about it. Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second, just one. She knew about those burns. She had treated those burns. Robert had come home that evening, 3 hours late, and she had been standing at the kitchen window watching the smoke on the ridge. And when she'd heard the truck, she'd gone out to meet him, and she'd seen his arms, and she'd said, "Robert James Harper," and he'd said, "I'm fine. Evie, it's fine." And she'd said, "Get in the kitchen right now," and they'd sat at that table, that same table she was sitting at now, while she cleaned and wrapped the burns, and she'd asked him what happened. And he'd said there was a kid in a ditch, and she'd said, "Of course there was." And he'd said, "Don't start, Evie." And she'd said, "I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing your arm now. Hold still." She had never known the kid's name. Robert hadn't offered it, and she hadn't asked because that wasn't how Robert operated. People in trouble were people in trouble. They didn't need names to deserve help. "He didn't ask me anything," Hunter said. "Not my name, not what I was doing out there, not about the warrants, which I found out later. The fire lookout station had already called in when they saw me on that road. He knew. He had to have known." Hunter looked up at her. "He didn't ask. He just got me out. And then he sat with me in the parking lot of the ranger station for 20 minutes while I stopped shaking. And then he said," Hunter paused. "Go ahead," Evelyn said softly. "He said, 'Young man, you have used up considerable luck today. I'd suggest not wasting what's left of it.'" Hunter's voice roughened slightly at the edges, just slightly. And then he went inside to file his report. And I sat in that parking lot for a long time. And then I drove away. Luke made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "And you never forgot it," Bo said. It wasn't a question. "I never forgot it," Hunter said. "And I did everything wrong for a while after that. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't fixed overnight. I went back to the same things for almost 2 more years." He looked at his hands. But that voice stayed with me. That exact sentence. Every time I was about to do something I knew was going to cost me the rest of my life, I heard it. "You have used up considerable luck today. I'd suggest not wasting what's left of it." He shook his head slowly. "It took me 2 years, and then it took me another 3 to make something of myself that didn't embarrass that man's decision to go back in for me." The room held everything he'd said. Evelyn was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the photograph on the mantel, and the way the firelight moved across Robert's face in it, and the fact that the universe in its occasionally staggering perversity had delivered this information to her in a farmhouse in a blizzard at 5 in the morning with 6 bikers and a pot of stew and 3 candles burning low. She thought Robert would have found this absolutely perfect. "How long have you been looking for me?" she asked. Hunter looked up. "Since I heard he died, about 9 years. Lost the lead twice once when the ranger station records from that district were moved in a database transfer and the report got mislabeled. Once when I found a Robert Harper in Missoula who was not your husband." He paused. "I should have hired someone professional to find you earlier. I kept thinking I'd find you on the next ride. Kept thinking I'd find you on my own because it felt like it needed to be that way. And instead," Luke said quietly, "a blizzard found her for you." Hunter looked at Luke. Something moved between them, the easy, wordless communication of men who have ridden long roads together. "Yeah," Hunter said. "Instead, the blizzard did it." Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up carefully, her knees voicing the same opinion they'd had all night, and crossed to the mantel and picked up Robert's photograph and brought it back to where Hunter was sitting and held it out to him. He took it with both hands. He looked at it for a long time. "That's him," he said, quietly, completely. "That's him," she said. Hunter held the photograph and did not try to manage what was on his face, and Evelyn respected him enormously for that. It would have been easy to be stoic about it. He chose not to be. After a long moment, he carefully handed the photograph back to her. "I brought something," he said. He reached inside his, cut the inner breast pocket, and withdrew a small envelope slightly bent at one corner from months of being carried, and held it out to her. She took it. Inside was a letter, handwritten 2 pages dated 14 months earlier. She read the first paragraph and then looked up at him. "You've been carrying this for over a year," she said. "I wrote it 3 years ago," he said. "That's the 4th draft. I kept finding things wrong with the other ones." She looked back down at the letter. She would read it completely later privately, the way something that personal deserved to be read. But in the first paragraph, he had written, Mrs. Harper, your husband saved my life in August of 1998, and I have spent every year since then trying to become someone worthy of that. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I haven't stopped trying. She folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. He would have been so glad, she said. He always wondered about the people he helped. He never knew how they came out. Her voice was steady. She had decided it was going to be steady. He used to say that was the hardest part of the job. You put yourself into someone's story, and then you never get to find out the ending. Hunter looked at her. He got his ending, he said. He just wasn't there to hear it. Evelyn pressed her lips together for one moment. Just one. Then she nodded. No, she said, but I am. The storm reached what felt like its peak somewhere in that exchange, the walls of the farmhouse shuddering under a gust that rattled every window simultaneously, and then as if the story itself had needed to reach that moment before it could begin. Its turn, the wind began almost imperceptibly to ease. Not stop, not yet, but the quality of it changed. Bo noticed first. He had been sitting near the window, and he turned his head slightly at the change in pressure and said, Is that, don't say it? Rex said immediately, I'm just saying, don't jinx it. But it was. Gradually, in the particular incremental way of mountain storms that burn themselves out by sheer exhaustion, the wind was pulling back. The snow was still falling, but the ferocity was leaving it. Luke pushed himself to a fuller seated position, and this time nobody told him to lie back down, because his color was good and his eyes were clear, and he was moving with something approaching his own coordination. How are you feeling? Evelyn asked him. Like I met a road and the road won, he said, but alive. That's the correct answer, she said. Hungry. His face answered that before his voice did. She heated the second to last jar of stew on the stove and brought him a bowl, and he ate it with the specific gratitude of a tawny that has burned through everything it had, keeping itself alive and is now desperately restocking. He didn't speak while he ate, just focused entirely on the food with an attention that was almost devotional. Hunter watched him eat, and some of the tension that had been in his shoulders all night quietly left. You scare me like that again, Hunter said to Luke conversationally. I'm leaving you in Colorado next year. No, you won't, Luke said without looking up from his bowl. No, Hunter agreed. I won't. Crow had moved from the kitchen to the dining room and was examining the corner leak with a flashlight he'd found somewhere, running his fingers along the ceiling line with the focused expression of a man diagnosing a problem. He came back to the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Harper, he said, in that corner, it's not structural damage. It's a failed flashing seal around the chimney. Couple hours of work, in good weather it's fixed. Materials cost is maybe $40. She looked at him. I'm not telling you to be a burden, he said carefully. I'm telling you because it's an easy fix and it shouldn't be leaking. My husband used to say the same thing, she said. Did he fix it? He kept meaning to. Crow nodded one slow, understanding nod. The things we keep meaning to, he said. Yes, she said, those things. She said it without bitterness. It was just true, the particular truth of people who love someone who worked themselves to the edge and still always had one more task on the list that the years ran out before reaching. Diesel had been quiet for the last hour, which Evelyn had noticed, because Diesel's quiet was a different quality than the others' quiet. The others went quiet when they were thinking. Diesel went quiet when he was feeling something he wasn't sure what to do with. She'd identified that about him sometime around 3 a.m. and had been leaving him the space to process it. Now he spoke. Mrs. Harper, he said, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. You said you deliver food to your neighbors every week. She looked at him steadily. Yes. You've got 3 jars of stew left, he said. You gave us the bread you were rationing. Your pantry, he stopped. You looked in my pantry, she said, his jaw tightened. I was looking for something to offer you for tonight. I'm sorry I shouldn't have. It's all right, she said. What's your question? Diesel looked at her with the particular discomfort of a large man confronting a small woman's dignity and not wanting to damage it. How do you deliver food to other people, he said, when you don't have enough yourself? The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn looked at Diesel for a moment. Because they need it more, she said simply. How do you know that? Because I check, she said. I know my neighbors. I know who's struggling more than I am. That's not a complicated calculation. But you, Diesel. She said his name with enough gentleness and enough finality that it closed the sentence he'd been about to finish. I have a roof, I have a wood stove, I have a fireplace and enough wood to last the winter. I have a pension. It's small, but it's there. She folded her hands on the table. I have lived a full life with a man I loved for 41 years. I have a daughter in Missoula who calls me every Sunday without fail. I have a neighbor down the road named Clara who brings me pie every Thanksgiving. She met Diesel's eyes. I am not a person to be pitied. I am a person who is choosing how to spend what she has. There is a very large difference. Diesel held her gaze. Yes, ma'am, he said, but he didn't say it automatically. He said it like he was filing it somewhere he intended to keep it. The thing is, Rex said from the corner. He'd been so quiet, Evelyn had almost forgotten he was there. She's feeding us right now. Everyone looked at him. He gestured at the stove, at the pot, at the empty bread plate. She's giving us her last 3 jars, he said. And she's doing it the same way she does everything else. Like it's not even a question. The room sat with that. Luke, who had finished his bowl and was looking substantially more like himself, looked at Evelyn. Do you know, he said, how rare that is? No, she said, because it shouldn't be rare. The sky when Bo looked out the kitchen window at around 6:15 had gone from black to the particular blue-gray that precedes dawn in the mountains, and the snow had slowed from a wall to a curtain to something approaching actual flakes with actual space between them. Road might be passable by mid-morning, Rex said, looking over Bo's shoulder. Storm shifting north, Crow confirmed. He had more weather sense than the others. Something about the years he'd spent working outdoor construction had given him a reliable feel for it. 2-3 hours, you'll see the plows on 12. Hunter was on the phone. The signal had returned weakly sometime around 6. The tower's apparently back online after whatever had knocked them out, making calls in the living room in a voice too quiet to overhear. He came back to the kitchen doorway after 10 minutes with an expression that meant he had moved something into motion. I called our chapter coordinator, he said to the room in general. Told him where we are. He's already been in contact with our road captain about the stranded family from last night. They're fine. They made it to the county shelter. Relief moved through the room. And, Hunter said, looking at Evelyn, I made one other call. She waited. Our foundation has a regional contact in Billings. Jimmy Reyes, he does our disaster response coordination. He's going to have a supply truck out here day after tomorrow with some things. Hunter's expression was careful, calibrated to offer without imposing. Firewood, canned goods, some pantry staples. Evelyn opened her mouth. Not charity, Hunter said immediately. A delivery from us for tonight. She closed her mouth. She thought about fighting it. She genuinely considered it for about 3 seconds, the full force of 74 years of Montana independence assembling itself for the argument. And then she thought about Robert's voice saying, Evie, let people be good to you sometimes. That's also kindness. All right, she said. Hunter's shoulders dropped slightly, the way shoulders do when they've been braced against anticipated resistance. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. I'm being practical. Crow made a sound in the corner that might have been a laugh. Luke, by 7 o'clock, was sitting fully upright, had eaten twice, and was engaged in the specific activity of a young man feeling guilty about the trouble he'd caused, which expressed itself as anxious helpfulness. He had reorganized the firewood stack by the hearth without being asked, had taken over the bucket duty from Diesel without being told, and was now eyeing the kitchen shelves with the look of someone identifying his next contribution. Luke, Evelyn said without looking up from her tea, sit down. I'm fine. You were hypothermic 4 hours ago. Sit down. He sat down, but he sat down the way men do when they're complying under protest with a quality of managed energy that said he was only temporarily stationary. You want to know something, he said. Tell me. I've been writing with this chapter for 3 years, he said. I've seen Grizzly in a lot of situations. He glanced toward the living room where Hunter had gone to check on something. I've never seen him tell that story to anyone outside the club. Evelyn looked at her tea. Why not? She asked. Because it matters too much, Luke said simply. Things that matter too much, you protect them. You don't just, he moved his hand slightly, you don't just give them to people who won't know what to do with them. Evelyn understood that completely. He gave it to the right person, she said. Yeah, Luke said. He did. Hunter came back into the kitchen. He looked at Luke and said, "You're sitting. Good." Then he looked at Evelyn. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, "and I want you to hear the whole thing before you say no." She folded her hands around her teacup. "All right, this house needs work," he said. "Not just the roof flashing and the door and the corner leak. It needs real work, the kind that takes time and materials and people who know what they're doing." He held up a hand before she could respond. "I have those people. In this room and about 40 more I can get on a phone call right now. I'm not talking about a donation. I'm talking about coming back with permission and doing the work." She looked at him. "My husband spent his career helping people who didn't ask for it," Hunter said. "He didn't wait to be asked. He just identified the need and moved." He held her gaze. "I've been trying to live that way for 25 years. I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm trying." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the storm had retreated enough that she could hear the silence of new snow, that particular compressed quiet of a world muffled under depth. "Robert would have liked you," she said. "The you that you are now. He would have had an opinion about the younger version." "The younger version deserved every opinion," Hunter said. "Yes, but Robert would have kept it to himself. He was good at recognizing where people were trying to go." She looked at her hands. "He always said the direction mattered more than the starting point." Hunter held her gaze. "Then you'll let us come back," he said. It was still not quite a question. "I'll let you come back," she said. By 8 in the morning, the dawn had fully arrived, thin and white, and carrying the particular clarity that comes after a storm has broken, and the farmhouse had a quality that Evelyn couldn't immediately name and then realized she could. It felt occupied, not intruded upon, not crowded, occupied in the specific way of a house that was meant to have people in it and hasn't had enough of them for too long. She felt it the way you feel a word you've been searching for when it finally arrives. The men moved around her kitchen and her living room with the settled ease of people who had been somewhere long enough to stop being careful about taking up space. Crow was at the table with his hands wrapped around a mug, talking to Rex in a low voice about something that involved a lot of specific numbers mileage or materials she couldn't tell. Diesel had taken it upon himself to wash the dishes, which he was doing at the sink, with a focus that suggested this was important work, and he intended to honor it as such. Bo was sitting on the floor of the living room next to Luke, and they were talking quietly, and once Bo laughed the surprised, genuine laugh of someone who wasn't expecting to find something funny, and the sound of it moved through the house like something that belonged there. Luke caught Evelyn looking and raised his hand in a small wave. She raised hers back. Hunter was standing at the kitchen window. She came to stand beside him, and they looked out together at the white world and the iron sky and the barn where the bikes waited. "When the road opens," he said, "we'll need to head to Billings. We're already 2 days behind." "I know," she said, "but we'll be back," he said, "inside of 3 weeks, weather permitting." "Weather permitting," she agreed. He looked at her sideways. "You're not going to tell me it's unnecessary." "No," she said, "because it isn't unnecessary. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise." He looked back out the window. "Mrs. Harper," he said. "Evelyn," she said. A pause. "Evelyn," he said, and something in the way he said it with the same weight with which he'd said her husband's name the night before, with the full intention of a man who does not use words carelessly, told her that he was going to honor that invitation for the rest of his life. How did he make it look so easy, the way he just took people in? No hesitation, no calculation. She thought about that. He wasn't built any differently than anyone else, she said. He had fear. He had bad days. He had years when the job wore him down to the bone. She turned her mug in her hands. But he made a decision early on, I don't know exactly when. Maybe before I knew him, that he was going to live on the side of yes. When the question was whether to help, the answer was going to be yes, and he was going to figure out the rest afterward. Hunter listened to that. "Living on the side of yes," he said. "It costs something," she said. "He'd be the first to tell you that. It costs sleep and worry and resources, and sometimes it costs burns on your forearms. But he always said the alternative cost more." She looked at the window. "He said the things you don't do follow you longer than the things you do." Hunter was quiet for a moment. "He's been following me for 25 years, he said. "Not following you," she said, pointing. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular calm of a woman who has had 11 years to think about what her husband meant and has arrived through grief and solitude and small daily acts of generosity at something that might be called understanding. He wasn't haunting you, Hunter, she said. He was showing you where to go. Hunter looked away, out the window, at the white world. He was quiet for long enough that Evelyn thought the conversation had found its ending. Then he said, "We're coming back with materials to fix this house." "I know," she said, "and I want to talk to you about something else, something bigger, but not today. Today you need sleep and we need road." She looked at him. "Something bigger. Something that's going to take some explaining," he said, "and some paperwork, and probably some arguing, because I get the impression you're not easy to argue with." "You get the correct impression," she said. "Good," he said. "Neither am I." They stood at the window together while Crow and Rex pulled on their gear in the hallway, while Diesel finished the last of the dishes and dried his hands on a kitchen towel with the exactness of a man who had been taught that you leave a place the way you found it, and preferably better, while Bo helped Luke to his feet and checked his steadiness with the practical care of someone who has learned that you watch out for your people because nobody else is guaranteed to. Hunter turned from the window. "Let's get moving," he said to the room. The room moved. Evelyn walked them to the door, all 6 of them in the full morning light that was now pressing thin and white through the front windows. They geared up with the practiced efficiency of men who had done it 1,000 times, and they went out onto the porch, and the cold came in, and she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin up watching. Crow stopped on the porch step and turned back. "The flashing," he said. "I'll bring the materials when we come back. It's a 2-hour job. Your chimney will be tight by spring." "Thank you, Crow," she said. He nodded the single precise nod of a man filing a commitment in the category of things he will not fail to keep and went down the steps. Rex stopped. "Mrs. Harper," he said. "My mother." He stopped. "She passed 6 years ago. She was a lot like you." He said it simply and completely without decoration. "I just thought you should know." Evelyn looked at him. "What was her name?" she asked. "Patricia," he said. "Patricia raised a good man," she said. Rex held her gaze for one moment. Then he went down the steps. Bo stopped just before Hunter. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she'd been watching all night. That working to understand expression, that effortful attention. "I called my mom," he said, "just now, from the porch. She picked up on the first ring." "Good," Evelyn said. "She wants to know how you take your coffee," he said. "She says anyone who does what you did tonight deserves a thank you, and she wants to send one." Evelyn blinked. "Black," she said, "with a little sugar if it's strong." Bo smiled, the full, uncomplicated smile of a young man whose heart is actually in good working order, and went down the steps. Hunter stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment, and she looked at him, and 25 years of a dead man's kindness stood between them and was somehow not a weight, but a bridge. "Evelyn," he said. "Hunter," she said. "We'll be back in 3 weeks." "I'll put coffee on," she said. He went down the steps. She watched them go, all 6 of them moving through the white morning toward the barn, toward their bikes, toward the road that the plows were probably already working toward passable. She watched until they disappeared around the side of the barn, and she stood in the doorway for another moment after that, holding the cold and the quiet, and the particular sensation of a night that had rearranged something fundamental. Then she went inside. She closed the door. She picked up Robert's photograph from the mantel where she'd replaced it, and she looked at his face, and she said very quietly to the empty room, "He found me, Robert." She stood there with the photograph for a long moment. Then she heard the engine starting in the barn, one after another, the particular percussion of 6 motorcycles coming to life, and even through the walls in the distance, she could feel it, that low vital rumble, moving through the floor under her feet. She pressed her hand once against the photograph and set it carefully back on the mantel. She had dishes to do, wood to bring in, Clara down the road to call when the phones were fully back, a Sunday to get to, which was when her daughter called without fail. She had things to do, and in 3 weeks, 6 men were coming back to fix her roof. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. And outside, 6 motorcycles turned onto what remained of the road and headed towards Silver Creek. And what none of them knew yet, not Hunter with his letter finally delivered, not Luke restored and upright, not Crow with his mental list of materials, not Rex or Diesel or Bo, was that the road they were riding toward was not the end of something. It was a beginning wearing a storm's face. And Silver Creek, when those engines reached its edge, was about to discover exactly who had spent the night in Evelyn Harper's farmhouse. And nothing in that small town would be exactly the same again. The 6 motorcycles rolled into Silver Creek at 9:47 in the morning, and the town heard them before it saw them. That was always how it worked with a group that size. The sound arrived first, a low collective rumble that moved through walls and windows, and the particular compressed silence of a town still digging out from under 18 inches of snow. People heard it in their kitchens over coffee. They heard it in the hardware store where Dale Peterson was already running a generator to keep the space heaters going. They heard it at the diner on Main, where Ruth Ann Kowalski had opened at 7, despite the power being on backup, and had a full house of people who had nowhere else to be and needed somewhere warm to be not alone. Heads turned, conversations stopped. The first person to actually see them was Tommy Griggs, 12 years old, who had been on his front porch with a snow shovel when the bikes came around the curve on Route 12, and who stood with the shovel hanging from both hands and his mouth open as 6 motorcycles, snow-crusted, road-worn, bearing the Death Head emblem on the cuts of every rider, came down Main Street at a pace that said they were not passing through. They were arriving. Tommy dropped the shovel and ran inside and said, "Mom, Mom, there are Hell's Angels in town." His mother, Dana Griggs, who worked dispatch for the county sheriff's department, was on the phone to Deputy Carl Whitmore inside of 45 seconds. Carl Whitmore was already in his truck. He had heard the engines too. The bikers didn't stop at the diner or the hardware store or the gas station, which was the establishment. Silver Creek's more anxious residents were already mentally identifying as the highest probability location for trouble. They turned left on Sycamore, which ran parallel to Main, and which most people in Silver Creek only knew as the road that went out toward the East Farmsteads. And they pulled into the parking lot of the volunteer fire department, the only lot in town big enough to hold 6 motorcycles with room to move, and they parked in a line and cut their engines. Carl Whitmore pulled up 30 seconds later. He was 41, had been deputy in Silver Creek for 11 years, and prided himself on being the kind of law enforcement that did not escalate situations unnecessarily. He also prided himself on knowing his town, and he knew that 6 Hells Angels in the volunteer fire department parking lot on a Wednesday morning through a blizzard was not a situation that had an obvious precedent in his experience. He got out of his truck slowly. Hunter Mason got off his bike slowly. They looked at each other across the distance of the parking lot with the mutual assessment of 2 men who are each trying to determine what kind of situation this actually is. Carl spoke first. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Hunter said. "You boys ride through last night in the storm." "We were caught in it," Hunter said. "We sheltered at a farmhouse about 4 miles east, Mrs. Evelyn Harper's property." Carl's expression shifted not towards suspicion, but towards something more complicated. He knew Evelyn Harper. Everyone in Silver Creek knew Evelyn Harper in the specific way that small towns know their anchoring figures, the people who have been there long enough and quietly done enough that their presence is load-bearing. "Evelyn's all right," he asked, and the question was genuine. "She's fine," Hunter said. "Yes, hon, better than fine. She took us in when one of my riders was in hypothermia, gave us everything she had." He paused. "She has a leaking roof and a heating system that's marginal at best, and I intend to address both of those things. But she's safe and she's well." Carl looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the 5 other men still sitting on their bikes, and at the young one, Luke, who was holding himself with the slightly careful posture of someone whose body was still in negotiation with the previous night. "You coming through town or stopping?" Carl asked. "Stopping," Hunter said. "I need to make some calls. I need to buy some supplies. And I need to talk to whoever handles community services in this town." Carl tilted his head slightly. "That'd be Marcy Delgado at the town office. She's probably there now. She lives 3 blocks away, and she comes in even when the power's out." "Thank you," Hunter said. Carl stood there for another moment. "Deputy," Hunter said, "I understand we're not the standard Wednesday morning arrival here. I'm not going to make your job harder than it is. If you want to run our plates and run our names, do it. We'll be here." It was Carl Whitmore would tell his wife that evening the most disarming thing anyone had ever said to him in 11 years of law enforcement. Not aggressive, not accommodating in the false way of people who are hiding something, Just honest. Here we are. Do what you need to do. We have nothing to arrange ourselves around. Appreciate that, Carl said. He ran the plates from his truck while the bikers went to the diner for coffee, and what he found confirmed some things and complicated others, and he sat in his truck in the fire department parking lot for a few minutes thinking about it. Hunter Mason's legal name was Harold James Mason. He had a record. It was old. It was sealed in 2 jurisdictions, and it was attached to a name that had been essentially rebuilt over the past 2 decades into something that looked nothing like its origins. The company attached to his current identification was Mason Emergency Logistics, LLC, incorporated in Colorado with contracts listed that included FEMA, the Red Cross, and 3 state emergency management agencies. Carl Whitmore put his phone down. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called Marcy Delgado. Inside the diner, Ruth Ann Kowalski set 6 coffees on the counter without being asked, studied the men sitting on her stools with the frank assessment of a woman who had been running a diner in a small town for 22 years and had therefore seen most categories of human being, and said, "You boys eat. We'd be grateful," Hunter said. "Eggs. We got the backup generator going. I can do eggs." "Eggs would be incredible," Luke said from the end of the stool line with a sincerity that made Ruth Ann look at him twice. She started cracking eggs. The diner had gone quiet when they'd walked in, not silent, but that particular recalibrated quiet of a room that has collectively decided to pay attention to something. The 4 other tables were occupied 2 old men from the Henderson's dairy operation who had been coming to Ruth Ann's every Wednesday morning since before most of the town was born. A young couple from the new development on the north side who were clearly not from here originally and were managing their reaction to the bikers with the effortful neutrality of people who had read things about not judging, and Pamela Voss, who was 63 on the town council, and who was looking at Hunter Mason over the rim of her reading glasses with an expression that combined alarmed curiosity and the specific political calculation of a woman who had been navigating civic life in a small town for 30 years. It was Pamela who spoke first because Pamela always spoke first. "You're the ones who were at Evelyn Harper's," she said. "Not a question." Hunter looked at her over his shoulder. "Word travels fast." "Carl called me 3 minutes ago," she said. "Small town. Also, Tommy Griggs told his mother, and Sandra Griggs tells everyone everything within 4 minutes of learning it herself." She set her coffee cup down. "Is Evelyn all right?" "She's fine," Hunter said, and something in the repetition, the same words he'd used with Carl, the same genuine steadiness had made Pamela's shoulders drop slightly from where they'd been. "She shouldn't be out there alone," Pamela said, and there was something beneath the words, the specific weight of a community's collective guilt about a thing they know and have not sufficiently addressed. "No," Hunter said, "she shouldn't." The eggs arrived. The diner's ambient noise gradually recalibrated again towards something closer to normal. The 2 old dairymen returned to their conversation. The young couple started looking at their phones. Pamela Voss did not look away from Hunter Mason. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. "Fix her roof," Hunter said, "her heating, her door frame, and 3 interior leaks, and then some other things that are going to take a conversation." He turned on his stool to face her fully. "Are you on the town council?" 22 years, she said. "Then you're one of the people I needs to talk to," he said. Pamela Voss studied him over her glasses for a long moment. "Marcy Delgado's office," she said. 11 o'clock. I'll make sure she's there." "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I have about 40 questions, and I intend to ask all of them." Crow made a small sound at the end of the counter that might have been approval. The meeting at Marcy Delgado's office at 11 o'clock began with 8 people and ended with 14 because Silver Creek was the kind of place where word of an unusual meeting reached the relevant parties within the hour. By the time Hunter arrived with Rex at his shoulder, he'd left the others at the diner with instructions to rest and eat and not do anything that would complicate Carl Whitmore's Wednesday. The room contained Marcy Pamela, the volunteer fire chief, Doug Haynes, a woman named Gloria Ferris who ran the senior services program out of the church basement, and 3 other council members who had arrived with the particular energy of people who had heard something was happening and were determined not to miss it. Hunter sat down. He told them in the same precise and undecorated way he'd spoken to Evelyn all night, who he was, what his company did, why he was in Silver Creek, and what he wanted to do. He told them about the night at the farmhouse. Not all of it, the part about Robert Harper he kept close because that part belonged to Evelyn, and he wasn't going to distribute it without her permission. He told them about the hypothermia in the shelter and what he'd observed about the condition of the house and the woman living in it. Then he told them about Silver Creek, because he had, in the hours since dawn, while the road was opening and the calls were being made, done what he always did when he arrived somewhere that needed something. He had started looking. He had asked Ruth Ann questions while she cooked. He had listened to Pamela Voss with the specific attention of a man who processes community information as professional data. He had noted the fire department's equipment, the age of the emergency vehicles, the gaps in the preparedness infrastructure of a mountain town that got the kind of storm they'd had last night several times a year. What he told them was this: Silver Creek was a town that was one bad winter away from a serious crisis. Its emergency warming infrastructure was zero. There was no designated shelter, no backup power protocol, no coordinated response for isolated residents during road closures. Its volunteer fire department was running equipment that was 8 to 12 years past recommended replacement cycles. Its senior services program, Gloria Ferris, confirmed this with a look that said she had been saying it for years to anyone who would listen, served 63 residents with a budget that had not increased since 2019. He said it without condescension. He said it with the brisk familiarity of a man who had assessed 50 towns exactly like this one and understood that the gap between what a community needed and what it had was almost never the result of indifference. It was almost always the result of limited resources meeting unlimited need. "What are you proposing?" Marcy Delgado said. She was 45, efficient, and had the look of someone who had been trying to stretch an inadequate budget for long enough that she'd stopped being surprised by the shortfall, but had never stopped being frustrated by it. Hunter told her. The room went very quiet. Doug Haynes, the fire chief, said, "Say that again." Hunter said it again. Pamela Voss took her reading glasses off entirely, which was something she only did when she needed her full, unmediated vision on something. "You're talking about a significant investment," she said. "I'm talking about what the town needs," Hunter said. "The investment follows the need. That's how my foundation works." "Why," said one of the council members, a man named Gerald Park, who had been quiet until now, and who asked the question with the blunt pragmatism of someone who had learned to be suspicious of large offers. "Why this town? Why now?" Hunter looked at him steadily. "Because I sheltered in the house of a woman who had almost nothing and gave it all away without hesitation," he said. "And because that woman's husband did something for me 25 years ago that I have been trying to deserve every day since. And because Silver Creek is a good town with a gap in its safety net that I have the capacity to help close." He held Gerald Park's gaze. "Those are the reasons. All of them. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm asking for cooperation, and I'm asking for the town's trust, and I understand that trust is earned, not given, and I'm prepared to earn it." Gerald Park was quiet for a moment. "The trust part," he said. "How do you earn that?" "By showing up," Hunter said. "By doing what I said. By being here in 3 weeks with materials and people and following through every step of the way." Another silence. It was Gloria Ferris who broke it. She was 67, had silver hair cut short and practical, and had the look of a woman who had spent decades doing more with less and had developed extremely accurate radar for which offers were real and which were performances. "Mr. Mason," she said, "I have been running the senior services program in this town for 11 years. I have sat in 14 meetings that started like this one. Proposals, commitments, follow-through that evaporated." She looked at him directly. "What makes you different?" Hunter looked back at her. "Nothing makes me different in advance," he said. "That's my honest answer. I can tell you about our track record. I can give you references from 6 communities where we've done what I'm describing. I can give you our foundation's financials." He paused. "But different is something you determine on the back end, not the front. And the only way I get to the back end is if you let me start." Gloria Ferris considered him for a long moment. "Evelyn Harper let you in," she said. "She did," he said. "Evelyn Harper," Gloria said carefully, "has better instincts than anyone I know." "I believe that," he said. Gloria turned to Marcy. "I think we hear the rest of it," she said. Marcy nodded. They heard the rest of it. What none of them were prepared for, not Marcy, not Pamela, not even Gerald Park, who had been suspicious from the start and remained professionally suspicious throughout, was the scope of it. Hunter Mason had not come to Silver Creek with a gesture. He had come with something closer to a blueprint, refined over 2 decades of disaster response work tailored in the 6 hours since dawn to the specific topography of this specific town's specific needs. A permanent emergency warming shelter housed in the reconfigured back section of the fire department building, capable of holding 40 people with backup generator power and a supply cache designed for 72-hour storm scenarios. A full equipment upgrade for the volunteer fire department coordinated with the state fire marshal's office to ensure compliance and eligibility for matching state funds. A winter food assistance program running October through March, administered through Gloria's existing senior services infrastructure and expanded to cover families, not just seniors. A scholarship program, he used that word deliberately and specifically in the name of Robert and Evelyn Harper for Silver Creek students pursuing careers in emergency services, forestry, or public health. He laid it out item by item, not reading from notes, but speaking from the kind of thorough preparation that has been so thoroughly internalized it no longer needs paper. When he was done, the room was quiet for a full 10 seconds. Doug Haynes exhaled slowly. "The equipment alone," he said. "We've had 3 trucks on our want list for 6 years." "I know," Hunter said. "I looked at your equipment log in the county database this morning." Doug stared at him. "That's a public record." "I know how to use public records," Hunter said. "It's most of what I do." Pamela Voss put her glasses back on. She had the look of a woman who was making a decision that she understood was significant and was going to make it anyway. "I want to call Evelyn," she said. "Before we go further, I want to hear from her directly that she's all right and that she's aware of what you're proposing." "That's exactly the right call," Hunter said immediately. "I'd be concerned if you didn't." Pamela looked slightly surprised by the immediacy of his agreement. Then she picked up her phone. They all listened to one side of the conversation. Pamela, who had known Evelyn Harper for 22 years, who had watched her shrink her own needs to expand her generosity, who had brought her soup twice during the winter 2 years ago when the roads were bad and Evelyn's car wouldn't start, and who had felt the specific helpless frustration of caring about someone who was constitutionally opposed to accepting care, that Pamela Voss went quiet in the middle of what she'd intended to be a checking-in call and stayed quiet for almost 2 minutes while Evelyn spoke. When she hung up, she sat still for a moment. "Well, booked in," Marcy said. Pamela looked at Hunter. "She said, I am." Pamela reported, her voice carrying the slight, careful quality of someone relaying something that has moved them more than they expected. That the only thing she wants is for the warming shelter to be named after the volunteer fire department's dog that died in 2019 because, quote, "he showed up every single time and he deserves recognition." There was a beat of silence. Then Doug Haynes laughed, the full surprise laugh of a man who had genuinely not expected that. "That was Biscuit," he said. "He was a beagle." "She says Biscuit's name goes on the door or she's withdrawing her endorsement," Pamela said. "Biscuit's name goes on the door," Hunter said without hesitation. The room laughed, and the laugh broke something that had been carefully held in position since Hunter had walked in, and in the space it opened up, the meeting became a different kind of meeting, still serious, still detailed, but no longer defensive. People started asking practical questions, good questions, the kind of questions that meant they were thinking about how to make something work rather than reasons why it couldn't. Gerald Park, it turned out, had run a construction company before joining the council and had specific and useful opinions about the fire department building's structural capacity. Marcy had a relationship with the county grants office that could potentially leverage Hunter's foundation money with federal matching funds in ways that could extend the reach of everything by 30%. Gloria Ferris pulled out a notebook that she'd apparently been carrying for years with annotated lists of every gap in the senior services program, and she and Hunter went through it with a fluency that suggested they were speaking a language they'd both learned in the same hard school. At one point, Carl Whitmore, who had been mostly quiet, said, "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Go ahead," Hunter said. "I ran your plates this morning," Carl said. "I know who you were 20-some years ago." He held Hunter's gaze. "Does that affect any of this?" "That's your determination to make," Hunter said, "not mine." "I know it's my determination," Carl said. "I'm asking what you think." Hunter looked at the table for a moment. "I think a man who was pulled out of a ditch by a forest ranger spent 25 years deciding what to do about it," he said. "And I think the answer he arrived at is sitting in this room." He looked at Carl. Whether that's good enough is between you and your conscience. I can't decide that for you. Carl looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded a single conclusive nod and sat back. Good enough for me, he said. The meeting ended at 1:15 with a preliminary agreement, a list of action items, and Marcy's commitment to have the formal partnership paperwork drafted within 2 weeks. People filed out with the particular forward-leaning energy of a group that has just committed to something real, the kind of energy that is distinct from enthusiasm because it carries actual weight. Hunter walked out last with Rex into the cold afternoon. Rex said nothing for half a block. Then he said, Gloria Ferris is going to be a problem. Hunter looked at him. What? Not a bad problem, Rex clarified. A force of nature problem. She's going to take everything you offered and expand it by 50%, and you're going to find yourself committed to things you didn't plan on. Hunter considered that. Good, he said. They walked back toward the diner. What Hunter didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the story of the night at the farmhouse had already been moving through Silver Creek for hours by the time the meeting ended, moving in the way that stories move through small towns where everyone knows the central characters and the territory is familiar enough that every detail lands with specific weight. Tommy Griggs had told his mother, Sandra Griggs had told the women in the church basement where she volunteered on Wednesdays, and 4 of those women were related by blood or marriage to people on the volunteer fire department, and one of them was the wife of Gerald Park. Ruth Ann Kowalski had been talking all morning between egg orders, filling in the shape of what she'd gathered from the bikers' conversation and from her own long knowledge of Evelyn Harper. By noon, the general outline was known throughout town. By early afternoon, the specifics were traveling. 6 Hells Angels caught in the storm, 1 nearly dead. Evelyn Harper alone in her farmhouse, opening the door at midnight. People reacted to that story according to the specific architecture of who they were. There were people who were frightened, not of what had happened, which had ended without harm, but of the proximity of it, the nearness of the thing that could have been different. There were people who were proud of Evelyn in the specific way that communities are proud of their best members, the pride that is partly admiration and partly relief that someone has demonstrated what you hope you would do in the same situation. There were people who were uncomfortable, and it was a productive discomfort, the kind that came from the gap between what they had assumed about the bikers based on the patch on their cuts and what had actually occurred. And there was one person who was angry. His name was Frank Dolan. He was 58, had lived in Silver Creek his entire life, and had a very clear and long-established opinion about motorcycle clubs in general, and the Hells Angels in particular, an opinion formed from stories he'd accumulated over decades and held with the conviction of someone who has never needed to examine where his convictions come from. When he heard the story from his neighbor who'd heard it from the church basement chain, he drove to the diner. He found Ruth Ann behind the counter. Tell me it's not true, he said. Tell me Evelyn didn't actually. She did, Ruth Ann said. She could have been. She wasn't, Ruth Ann said. She's fine. They fixed her door frame and stacked her wood, and one of them washed every dish in her kitchen before he left. Frank Dolan stared at her. Ruth Ann, they're Hells Angels. They're also the reason Luke Petrie isn't a dead hypothermia case on the county report, Ruth Ann said with the particular tone she used when she was going to be patient, but was not going to yield. Because they were out in that storm trying to help a stranded family when one of their own went down, and then a 74-year-old woman brought them all inside and kept them alive with homemade stew and her late husband's blankets. Frank was quiet. It's not that simple, he said, but the conviction had left the sentence before he finished it. Frank, Ruth Ann said. She put her coffee pot down and looked at him directly. How many times has Evelyn Harper done something for you or your family in the last 20 years? A pause. Several, he said reluctantly. Did you ask what she was before you accepted it? He looked at the counter. That's different, he said. Is it? She said, and left the question sitting there while she went to refill someone's coffee because Ruth Ann Kowalski had learned long ago that some arguments were best completed in the other person's own head. Frank Dolan sat at the counter for 20 minutes. He drank a cup of coffee he hadn't ordered, but that appeared in front of him anyway. He sat with the specific discomfort of a man whose certainties have been complicated and who is honest enough with himself to know it. When he left, he did not go home. He drove out on Route 12 past the point where the plows had cleared and into the beginning of the uncleared section. And he stopped there and looked out at Evelyn Harper's farmhouse, visible at the end of the drive, smoke coming from the chimney, the tracks of 6 motorcycles still visible in the compressed snow of the driveway. He sat there for a while. Then he turned his truck around and drove back into town and went to the hardware store and bought $40 worth of chimney flashing materials because he had heard Pamela Voss talking outside the town office about a failed flashing seal, and Frank Dolan had been doing his own roof work for 30 years, and there were some things you couldn't unknow once you knew them. He put the materials in his truck bed and drove home, and didn't tell anyone he'd done it because Frank Dolan was not a man who found the public adjustment of his positions easy. But he sat at his kitchen table that night with his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, and he thought about what Ruth Ann had said. Did you ask what she was before you accepted it? Back at the diner at a corner table, Luke was on the phone with his mother in Louisville for the first time in 4 months. She cried. He didn't cry, but he was very quiet in the particular way of someone who is working hard not to. He told her about the crash, and she said, Lucas James Petrie, and he said, I know, Mom. And she said, are you all right? And he said, I am actually, I really am. And there was something in the way he said it that was different from the way he usually said the things that were supposed to be reassuring. It was true. That was the difference. It was simply actually true. Hunter watched Luke from across the diner and then looked at his phone and made a call he'd been composing in his head since the farmhouse. His foundation's executive director, a woman named Claire Huang, who ran their operations with the same brisk competence with which she apparently ran most aspects of her life, answered on the second ring. I'm in Silver Creek, Montana, he said. I know, she said. Jimmy called me this morning. He said you were activating a regional response. Bigger than regional, Hunter said. A pause. How much bigger, he told her. Another pause longer. Hunter, Claire said. I know what it is, he said. Can we do it? He heard her thinking through it, the precise, efficient thinking of someone who has managed disaster response budgets for 11 years and knows exactly where the margins are. We can do most of it this fiscal year, she said. The equipment is a phased commitment. We'd need to structure it over 2 years. The shelter and the food program we can fully fund immediately. A pause. The scholarship fund I want to talk to you about separately. There's a structure that could make it enduring rather than one time. Enduring, he said. Yes. Then yes, she said. We can do it. Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had a slightly different quality. Hunter, why this town? He looked out the diner window at Silver Creek's Main Street, at the snowbank sidewalks, in the hardware store, in the fire department parking lot where 6 motorcycles were waiting, at the ordinary and essential smallness of a community that was holding its people together with what it had and needed more. He thought about Evelyn Harper in her kitchen at 3:30 in the morning, serving her last jar of stew to men who came with a reputation and nothing else. Because someone here reminded me, he said, what the job is actually for. Claire was quiet for a moment. I'll start the paperwork this afternoon, she said. He hung up. Bo appeared at his elbow with a refilled coffee and the look of a young man who was recalibrating his understanding of several things at once. Grizzly, he said. Yeah. This whole thing, Bo said. He gestured a small, encompassing gesture that covered the diner and the town and last night and everything since. Did you know when we left Colorado, did you know we were going to end up here? Hunter picked up his coffee. No, he said. We were going to Billings. But the storm, Hunter agreed. Bo shook his head slowly. I don't know what that is. Me neither, Hunter said, but I've stopped needing to know what to call it. It happened. We were there. She opened the door. He looked at Bo. Some things don't need a name. They just need to be honored. Bo was quiet for a moment. I talked to my mom twice today, he said. I know, I heard. She wants to send Evelyn Harper a Christmas card. Hunter looked at him. She wants to send a Christmas card, Bo said, to a woman she's never met in a town she's never been to, because she says anyone who does what Mrs. Harper did is the kind of person worth knowing, even from a distance. Hunter set his coffee down. Give your mother Evelyn's address, he said, and tell her she can do better than a Christmas card. Tell her we're going back in 3 weeks, and if she wants to come, there's going to be a lot of work, and she's welcome to be part of it. Bo stared at him. My mom doesn't ride. She doesn't have to ride, Hunter said. She can drive. Outside the diner window, Silver Creek continued its Wednesday afternoon business of digging out and restocking and checking on one another with the particular interdependence of a small mountain community that has spent generations learning that the blizzard does not care about your schedule, and the only reasonable response is to take care of your neighbors. People knocked on doors along the east end of town where the older residents lived alone. The hardware store ran a tab for 3 people who came in for necessities and couldn't pay until the end of the month. Clara Evelyn's neighbor called the farmhouse and talked to Evelyn for 40 minutes, and Evelyn didn't mention the bikers until Clara asked directly, and then she told it simply and completely, and Clara listened without interrupting, which was notable because Clara almost never listened without interrupting. At the end of it, Clara said, "Robert would have done the same thing." "I know," Evelyn said. "He's going to fix your roof." "In 3 weeks," Evelyn said, "if the weather holds." "I'll believe it when I see it," Clara said. Then after a pause, "But I think I'm going to see it." At 4 in the afternoon, Hunter walked back to the fire department parking lot and stood among the 6 bikes and called the chapter coordinator in Colorado and said they needed another 2 days before hitting the road. And the coordinator said he'd spread the word, and Hunter hung up and stood in the cold for a moment. Rex came up beside him. They stood there together in the way of men who have ridden enough miles together that silence is not absence. "You should call your daughter," Rex said. Hunter looked at him. "You were thinking about it all morning," Rex said. "I could tell." Hunter looked at his phone. His daughter was 23. She lived in Denver. They were in the particular stage of a father-daughter relationship that had survived his early years through the sheer force of her mother's steadiness and was now tentatively and imperfectly rebuilding itself on different terms that required Hunter to show up differently than he had when she was small, and he was still working out who he was going to be. He called her. She answered on the 3rd ring with the careful neutrality of someone who picks up not knowing what version of the conversation this is going to be. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Hey," he said. "I want to tell you about last night." A pause. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he said. "Better than okay. I want to tell you about a woman named Evelyn Harper." He heard something shift in her voice, not softened exactly, opened. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." He told her. He told her the whole thing, the storm, the door, the hypothermia, the night in the farmhouse, the photograph on the mantle, and finally with the care he would have given to something made of glass, the story of the forest ranger who had pulled him from a ditch in 1998 and said the sentence that had never fully left him, and the wife of that forest ranger who had opened her door to strangers in a blizzard 27 years later, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. His daughter was quiet for a long time when he finished. Then she said, "Dad, yeah, she sounds like someone I would really like." "You would," he said. "She'd like you too. She's the kind of person who asks real questions and listens to the actual answers." Another pause. "I want to come," his daughter said. "When you go back, in 3 weeks, I want to come." Hunter stood in the fire department parking lot in the cold afternoon air of Silver Creek, Montana, with his phone against his ear and his eyes on the 6 bikes that had brought him through a blizzard to the end of a 25-year search, and felt something he had been circling for a long time, without being able to name it, land cleanly and completely. "Yeah," he said. "I'd really like that." After he hung up, Rex said nothing. He just put his hand once briefly on Hunter's shoulder. And that was enough. By the time the streetlights came on in Silver Creek that evening, the story of the farmhouse had completed its first circuit through the town and was beginning its second deeper now, with more detail with the specific additions and corrections that stories acquire as they move through communities that care about accuracy because they care about the people involved. It was changing things in small ways that wouldn't be fully visible until later, the way a long winter changes a landscape not in one dramatic moment, but through accumulation, through the steady work of cold and time. Frank Dolan sat at his kitchen table with his flashing materials and his coffee, and something that was beginning reluctantly to resemble a decision. Clara called 2 more neighbors before bed. Ruth Ann stayed open an extra hour and refilled coffee for free because people needed somewhere to be. And in the farmhouse 4 miles east of town, Evelyn Harper sat at her kitchen table with Robert's Bible and Hunter's letter, reading the letter in full for the first time now that the house was quiet and the morning's weight had settled into something she could hold steadily. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the Bible in the book of Ruth, which had always been her favorite. She put her hand flat on the cover and sat in her kitchen with the wood stove and the candles in the particular inhabited quality the house still carried from the night before. And she said quietly to the room, to the man in the photograph on the mantel, to the specific and unrepeatable fact of what one night had been, "You pointed him in the right direction, Robert. He just needed somewhere to arrive." The wood stove ticked. The candles burned. Outside, Silver Creek went about the ordinary work of being a community, which is the most extraordinary work there is. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in December, when the temperature was 12 degrees and the sky was the flat white of a world, considering another storm, 12 motorcycles and 4 pickup trucks came down Route 12 towards Silver Creek. Hunter was in the lead. Crow was behind him, and behind Crow came a truck loaded with roofing materials, chimney flashing, weather seal, and lumber. Everything that had been measured and listed and ordered in the week after the first visit, sourced with the efficiency of a man who had been moving resources into hard places for 20 years and knew exactly how to do it. The second truck carried heating equipment. The third carried what Claire Huang had called the starter kit for the food program. Canned goods, dry staples, protein, enough to fill the gaps in the senior services inventory for 3 months while the formal supply chain was being established. The fourth truck was driven by a woman named Sandra Mason. She was 51, drove a dark blue F-150 with a Denver Broncos sticker on the rear window, and had her daughter's directness and her ex-husband's stubbornness in equal measure, which meant she had driven 11 hours from Denver because Hunter had said she was welcome to come, and she had decided that welcome was sufficient authorization. Hunter had not known she was coming until she pulled up behind the convoy in Billings. He had gotten out of his bike and walked to her window and said, "Sandra." She said, "Don't." He said, "I wasn't going to say anything." She said, "Good," and put her truck in drive. His daughter Maya was in the passenger seat, and she looked at her father through the windshield with the specific expression of a 23-year-old woman who has watched both of her parents navigate each other for her entire life and has made peace with the comedy of it. She waved, he waved back. He got on his bike, the convoy moved. Silver Creek was ready for them, which was itself a thing that had required some becoming. The version of Silver Creek that had existed 3 weeks ago, the version that watched 6 motorcycles pull into the fire department lot with the specific wariness of a town that had categorized the Hells Angels into a single mental file and locked it, was not entirely gone. Human nature does not revise itself on a 3-week timeline regardless of what the revising event was. But it had shifted. The story of the farmhouse had done its work moving through the community in the way that true stories move, not quickly, not comprehensively, but persistently, finding the cracks in assumption and working into them like water into stone. Marcy Delgado had spent the 3 weeks in a state of productive anxiety, driving the partnership paperwork through channels that weren't accustomed to moving quickly, leveraging the county grants relationship she'd mentioned in the meeting to unlock matching funds that nearly doubled the initial commitment, and calling Claire Huang 4 times with questions that Claire answered with the patient precision of a woman who respected someone doing their homework. Gloria Ferris had done exactly what Rex had predicted. She had taken Hunter's proposal and expanded it carefully with documentation and justification for every addition, and had presented the expanded version to Hunter in a phone call during which she talked for 22 uninterrupted minutes while he listened and took notes and said yes to 14 of the 16 additional items and asked for a 2-year delay on the remaining 2. And Gloria Ferris had said 6 months, and Hunter had said 12, and Gloria had said 8, and Hunter had said deal, and Gloria had hung up and said to her empty office, "I like that man." Doug Haynes had cleared and organized the fire department's back section with a thoroughness that suggested he had been wanting to reorganize it for years and had needed a specific occasion. He had also quietly and without broadcasting it sent an email to the state fire marshal's office informing them of the incoming equipment donation and asking about matching fund eligibility, and the state fire marshal's office had responded within 48 hours in a way that suggested they were very interested, and Doug had forwarded the chain to Marcy, and Marcy had added it to the folder she was building that was already 12 documents thick. Frank Dolan had gone to Evelyn's farmhouse 8 days after the blizzard. He had knocked on the door with his chimney flashing materials in a box under his arm, and when Evelyn opened it, he had said, without preamble, "I hear you've got a flashing problem on the chimney. I brought materials. I can fix it today if you'll have me." Evelyn had looked at him. "Frank," she said, "have you eaten lunch?" "Not yet," he said. "Come in," she said. "Eat first, then the chimney." He had come in, he had eaten the soup she heated, he had not said anything about the bikers, and she had not brought them up, and they had talked about the storm, and about Clara's arthritis, and about the Henderson dairy operation, and about how the County Road Commission never got the east section plowed as fast as the west section, which was a perennial injustice. And then Frank had gone up and fixed the chimney flashing in 2.5 hours and come back down and washed his hands in her kitchen sink and said, "That'll hold through the winter." "Thank you, Frank," she said. He picked up his toolbox. "Evelyn," he said. He stopped with his hand on the door. "I heard what you did that night." He did not look at her. "I've been thinking about it." "And she said," he looked at the door, "and I brought the flashing," he said, and he went out. Evelyn stood in her kitchen for a moment after the door closed. Then she smiled very quietly to herself and went to put the kettle on. That was Frank Dolan's way, and she had known him for 30 years, and she understood it the way you understand the people you've lived alongside long enough to see their shape clearly. Now the convoy was coming down Route 12, and word had spread through Silver Creek the way word spread through Silver Creek, and there was a small cluster of people in the fire department parking lot when the motorcycles turned in. Not a crowd, exactly more like a gathering, the organic accumulation of people who had a reason to be somewhere and had decided this was it. Doug Haynes was there with 2 of his volunteer firefighters. Gloria Ferris was there with a notebook. Marcy Delgado was there with a folder. Carl Whitmore was there in plain clothes, which meant he was there as a resident rather than as law enforcement, a distinction that mattered to him and that the town understood. Ruth Ann Kowalski was there with a thermal carafe of coffee because Ruth Ann's response to every human situation was to provide coffee, and she had long since stopped apologizing for it. Pamela Voss was there. Frank Dolan was there standing at the edge of the group with his hands in his jacket pockets, not making eye contact with anyone in particular. Hunter parked first and got off his bike, and Doug Haynes came forward, and they shook hands, and then there was a moment, one of those moments that doesn't have a script, where 2 groups of people who are not entirely sure yet how to be together in space are figuring it out in real time. And then Ruth Ann walked forward with her carafe and said, "Who needs coffee?" And the moment resolved itself into people holding cups and talking about the drive and the cold and whether more snow was coming, which is the universal human transition technology for getting from strangers to something else. Maya Mason got out of the passenger side of Sandra's truck and stood in the parking lot looking at Silver Creek for the first time, and it was exactly what she'd expected from her father's description and completely different from what she'd imagined. She had expected small, and she had expected cold, and she had expected the particular compressed quality of a mountain community that has been shaped by landscape and season and its own history. What she hadn't expected was the feeling immediate and specific of a place that knew itself. Not a perfect place, but a real one. She found Hunter at her elbow. "Well," he said. "It's good," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They drove out to the farmhouse together, Maya in Sandra's truck, Hunter on his bike, the convoy stringing out along the county road through the snow, and Evelyn Harper was standing on her front porch when they arrived, wearing her heavy coat, in the expression of a woman who had been watching the driveway for 20 minutes and was not going to admit it. Hunter parked and walked to the porch, and she looked at him and said, "You came back." "I said I would," he said. "People say a lot of things," she said. But she was smiling the small, certain smile of someone whose expectation has been confirmed. She looked at the convoy behind him, at the trucks and the motorcycles and the people climbing out and stretching at the organized activity beginning to unfold in her driveway. "You brought an army," she said. "Small army," he said. "Focused army." She looked at Sandra's truck. She looked at Maya getting out of it. "Who's that?" she said. "My daughter," Hunter said. "Maya." Evelyn studied Maya crossing the driveway with the frank assessment of a woman who had raised a daughter of her own and knew exactly what she was looking for. "She looks like she means it," Evelyn said. "She does," Hunter said. "It's her best quality and her most exhausting one." "It was your daughter's best quality too," Evelyn said. "And you're one to talk." Hunter looked at her. He had not told her about Maya before. He had mentioned having a daughter, but not the texture of their relationship, not the complicated work of the last 3 years, not the specific and fragile thing that was slowly being rebuilt. "I called her the day I left," he said. "I know," Evelyn said. "She emailed me." He stared at her. Tuesday of last week, Evelyn said. Her email address is very professional for someone her age. She introduced herself, told me what she did something in emergency medicine. She's in school and said she wanted to come and help and asked if that was all right. Evelyn looked at Hunter's expression and said without any attempt to conceal her satisfaction, I said, of course. Hunter stood on Evelyn Harper's porch in the December cold with his mouth not quite closed. You've been in contact with my daughter for 2 weeks, he said. We've exchanged 4 emails, Evelyn said. She's very direct. You can tell she was raised by people with strong opinions. Evelyn, she asked good questions, Evelyn has said. I answered them. She asked about Robert, and I told her about him, and she said it sounded like he was remarkable, and I said he had his moments. She turned toward the door. Come in out of the cold. I've got coffee on, and I made bread this morning. Hunter stood on the porch for one more moment, then he followed her in. Maya met him at the kitchen door, coming from a direction that meant she'd already been inside, already been introduced, and she had a cup of coffee in her hand and an expression that said she had been in this kitchen for 10 minutes and already understood something about it that would take most people considerably longer. She showed me Dad's photo, Maya said. Robert's photo, Hunter said. Her husband. I know whose photo, Maya said. She told me. She told me the whole thing. Her voice carried a careful quality, not strained, but held. She told me what he said to you in the parking lot. Hunter looked at his daughter. Don't waste what's left, Maya said. Her voice was steady. I've been thinking about that since you called, about what it means. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I think I've been wasting some. Maya, I'm not making this a whole thing, she said. I'm just telling you, so you know. She held his gaze. I came here because I wanted to, because she sounds like someone worth knowing. And because she stopped. Because he said, because you called me, she said. You called me and you told me a real thing. And I figured that deserved a real response. Hunter was quiet. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They stood in Evelyn's kitchen doorway, father and daughter doing the imperfect and necessary work of finding each other again, and Evelyn moved around them with bread and coffee and the tactful awareness of a woman who knew when to let a room hold something without interruption. Crow started on the chimney before noon. He had the materials Frank had bought. He found them stacked in the mudroom with a handwritten note that said, for the chimney, FD, and he looked at it for a moment and then pocketed it and got to work, because Crow recognized the gesture and understood that the right response to it was to honor it by doing the job well. The heating system required a specialist, which Hunter had anticipated and arranged. A man named Pete Alcott from Billings, who had spent 20 years doing forced air systems in mountain residential properties, arrived in his own truck at noon with his apprentice in a diagnostic unit and went to work with the focused intensity of someone who had seen this particular model of neglect before and had strong professional feelings about it. He came back downstairs at 2 p.m. and found Hunter in the kitchen. It's not unfixable, Pete said in the tone of a man delivering news that is technically positive but not uncomplicated. Tell me, Hunter said. Pete told him. The heat exchanger was cracked, had been cracked, he estimated for at least 2 seasons, which explained the uneven heat distribution and the particular smell Evelyn had mentioned and attributed to age. The blower motor was running at 60% capacity. The thermostat was a model that had been discontinued in 2009 for reasons Pete characterized as well-deserved. Full replacement is cleaner than repair, Pete said. I can have it done by tomorrow evening if I bring a second truck. Do it, Hunter said. Pete looked at him. I know what it costs, Hunter said. Pete nodded and went back to his phone. Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had been upstairs with Maya, who had apparently identified the second bedroom ceiling stain as a separate issue from the chimney flashing and had been asking Pete's apprentice, a 20-year-old named Jordan, who had not expected his Thursday to involve being cross-examined by a second-year emergency medicine student with extremely good follow-up questions to explain the relationship between roof drainage and interior moisture. Pete's going to replace the whole system, Hunter said before Evelyn could ask. She looked at him. It's cracked, he said. The exchanger. 2 seasons, he thinks. She was quiet. Evelyn, he said, you've been heating this house with a cracked heat exchanger. I thought it was just old, she said. It's always been. It wasn't always cracked, he said. He said it without accusation, but with the direct concern of someone who has just understood something alarming. Have you been having headaches, unusual tiredness? She looked at him. Some, she said. I'm 74, Hunter. I thought it was age. Hunter sat down at the kitchen table. He sat down with the deliberateness of someone whose legs have received news their body needed a moment to process. It might be age, he said, carefully, or it might be low-level carbon monoxide exposure. You need to see a doctor. I'm fine, Evelyn. He looked at her, the same look she had given him the night of the storm when she wanted him to understand she was serious and the discussion was over. Please, she looked at him for a moment. Clara's son-in-law is a GP, she said. Call him today, Hunter said. This afternoon. She looked at him for another moment. The full force of 74 years of Montana independence gathered itself, assessed the situation, and arrived at the same conclusion it had arrived at on the porch 3 weeks ago when he'd offered the supply truck. All right, she said. She called Clara's son-in-law, whose name was Dr. Ben Yue, and who came to the farmhouse at 4:30 that afternoon with a portable CO monitor and a blood test kit, and the professional calm of a man who had been called to farmhouses in the middle of winters in this county for 11 years and had learned not to be surprised by what he found. He was professionally speaking not surprised. But he sat with Evelyn at her kitchen table afterward and said things that were honest and careful and not designed to frighten, but to inform. And Evelyn listened with the same quality of attention she brought to everything complete undefensive processing. 6 months more of that exchanger, Ben said, and we'd be having a different conversation. Evelyn looked at her hands. Robert would be furious with me, she said quietly. Robert would fix it, Ben said, which I understand is what's happening. Yes, she said, it is. Ben shook Hunter's hand on the way out with a grip that communicated more than a handshake usually does. Hunter held the grip for a moment and then let it go and stood at the door watching the doctor's car go down the drive and felt the specific weight of what had almost happened in a house where a woman had been quietly failing to know how much she was failing. Rex came up beside him. She's okay, Rex said. She's okay because we came back, Hunter said. We came back because she let us in, Rex said. Hunter stood with that. Yeah, he said. We did. They worked through Thursday evening and all of Friday. The convoy had arranged accommodation at the motel in town, the only motel in Silver Creek, a 12-room operation run by a woman named Deb, who had initially been deeply uncertain about the booking and had called Marcy Delgado twice to confirm it was actually happening, and who by Friday morning was bringing homemade cinnamon rolls to the motel office and had asked Crow 4 questions about his professional background in construction and was now considering asking him to look at her own roof. The work at the farmhouse proceeded with the organized efficiency of people who have been well deployed. Crow and 2 other riders handled the exterior, the chimney, the roof seams, a section of the north-facing eaves that had been slowly separating. Pete and his expanded crew handled the heating system with the focus of people being paid to do something right and aware that right was the only acceptable standard. Maya and Jordan worked through the interior moisture issues with a thoroughness that impressed even Pete, who did not impress easily. Rex and Diesel rebuilt the mudroom door frame completely, not just repaired, but rebuilt with new framing and a door that sealed to current code standards. Evelyn moved through all of it with the composed acceptance of a woman who had made peace with being the recipient of generosity and was expressing her own through a continuous supply of coffee and food and the quality of her presence, asking real questions, remembering what people told her, noticing when someone needed a moment and creating the space for it without announcement. Sandra Mason, who had spent the first day being carefully on the periphery in the way of a woman navigating a situation whose parameters were still being established, found herself in Evelyn's kitchen on Friday morning, helping cut bread, and then found herself talking about things she hadn't particularly planned to talk about, which was something Evelyn apparently did to people without trying. She just asks, Sandra told Maya later with a quality of mild astonishment, she just asks a real question and then actually listens and then asks another one. I told her things I haven't told anyone in 2 years. What did she say? Maya asked. She said, Sandra stopped. She had the expression of someone who has received something valuable and is being careful with it. She said that the hardest thing about loving someone who's trying to be better is trusting the direction of the trying instead of measuring the distance. Maya looked at her mother. She said that about Dad, Sandra said, without me asking her to. She shook her head. How does she do that? I think, Maya said slowly, she just pays attention. And she's been doing it for 74 years, so she's had a lot of practice. At the town, the 3 weeks had done their own work. The formal partnership agreement between the Mason Foundation and Silver Creek had been signed on a Tuesday. Marcy had managed to get the council to an emergency meeting, and the vote had been 6-1, with Gerald Park casting the dissenting vote, not in opposition, but because he had a procedural concern about the easement language in Section 4. And once the language was adjusted, Gerald had said, all right, and the agreement had passed unanimously. Gloria Ferris had moved fast. The food program's first delivery was already staged in the church basement. 53 families identified outreach, completed first distribution, scheduled for the following Saturday. She had recruited 6 volunteers in 3 days, which was 2 more than she'd had for the entire senior services operation before, and she had the look of a woman running at exactly the speed she'd always wanted to run, but had never previously had the fuel for. Doug Haynes had received the equipment commitment in writing and had forwarded it to the state fire marshal. And the state fire marshal had responded with the matching fund authorization that Marcy had been hoping for, and Doug had stood in his fire station and looked at the authorization letter and thought about the truck they'd been running on a prayer and a maintenance schedule for 6 years, and felt something he was not fully comfortable identifying as relief, because it required him to admit how worried he'd been. What no one had anticipated, not Hunter, not Marcy, not Gloria, was Frank Dolan. Frank had gone back to Evelyn's farmhouse on the Wednesday of the work week, not announced, just appearing in the driveway at 9 in the morning with his truck and his tools, and a younger man who turned out to be his nephew and had said to Crow, who was on the roof, "What else needs doing on the exterior?" Crow had looked down at him for a moment. "West side fascia," Crow said, "in the back gutter section left corner." "I can do fascia," Frank said. "I know," Crow said. Frank had worked the rest of that day. He didn't talk much. He did the work with the competence of a man who knew what he was doing and needed neither supervision nor acknowledgement. At the end of the day, he had packed up his truck and he had gone to find Hunter. Hunter was in the kitchen. Frank stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Hunter and said, "I want to talk to you about the warming shelter." Hunter looked at him and was like, "Go ahead." "The fire department building is the right call for the shelter," Frank said. "Doug's got the space, but the insulation in that back section is inadequate. It'll cost more to heat than you've budgeted." Hunter waited. "I did commercial insulation for 12 years, Frank said. "Before I retired. I can do the shelter section. Materials cost plus my nephew for the labor. No markup." Hunter looked at Frank Dolan for a moment. This man who had stood at the edge of the parking lot on the first day with his hands in his pockets, not making eye contact, who had brought chimney flashing to a woman's house and called it just a job, who was now standing in her kitchen doorway offering something that was unmistakably itself, regardless of what he chose to call it. "Frank," Hunter said, "I'd be grateful." Frank nodded once. "When can you start?" Hunter said. "Monday," Frank said, "if Doug can have the section clear." "I'll call Doug tonight," Hunter said. Frank nodded again and went back to his truck. Rex appeared at Hunter's shoulder. "Is that the guy who—" Rex started. "Yes," Hunter said. "Huh," Rex said. They watched Frank's truck go down the drive. "People surprise you," Rex said, not as a discovery, as a confirmation of something he already knew. "Every time," Hunter said. The moment that changed the full shape of what Silver Creek was becoming happened on Friday evening. Hunter had asked Evelyn 2 weeks earlier in a phone call whether she would be willing to speak at a community meeting. Not a town hall, nothing formal. Just a gathering at the fire department, an opportunity for the people of Silver Creek to hear directly from her and to meet the people who were proposing to change things in their town. Evelyn had said she would think about it. Then she had called back the next day and said yes, but she had conditions. The conditions were no podium, no microphone if it could be avoided, and no one was to introduce her as a hero, because she hadn't done anything heroic. She had done something obvious, and if people couldn't tell the difference between heroic and obvious, they needed to think harder. Hunter had agreed to all 3 conditions. The gathering was at 7. By 6:50, there were 60 people in the fire department's main bay, more than 2/3 of Silver Creek's adult population, which for a Friday evening in December in a town this size was extraordinary. People had come because Marcy had sent an email, and because Carl had mentioned it at the diner, and because Gloria's network had spread the word, and because Silver Creek was a town where something real happening was sufficient reason to show up. Evelyn arrived with Clara, who had driven her in Clara's car, and who had dressed for the occasion in a way that suggested Clara considered this a significant event and intended to honor it sartorially. Evelyn wore what she always wore, good slacks, a cardigan, her late husband's watch on her left wrist. She walked into the fire department bay and looked at 60 people and did not flinch. Hunter met her at the door. "You don't have to say much," he said. "I know what I have to say," she said. "That's never been my problem." He smiled. She walked to the front of the room, not to a podium, just to a spot where people could see her, and the room went quiet without being asked. She looked at them. 60 people, old, young, some she'd known for decades, and some she barely recognized. She saw Frank Dolan in the third row looking at his hands. She saw Carl Whitmore near the back wall. She saw Gloria Ferris with her notebook. She saw Ruth Ann, who had brought coffee. She saw Doug Haynes standing beside a board with diagrams of the new shelter layout, and the look on his face, the specific look of a man seeing something he'd needed for years becoming real. And she thought of Robert, who had worn that look every time he came home from a rescue that had gone right. "I'm not going to tell you the story of the blizzard," Evelyn said. Her voice carried, without effort, the voice of a woman who had spent decades speaking to people in the specific registers of sincerity and practicality. "You've all heard it, some version of it anyway. The version going around town is mostly accurate, which for Silver Creek gossip is quite an achievement." A few people laughed. The tension in the room eased by half. "What I want to say," she said, "is something about why I opened the door, because I've heard some people asking that question and want to answer it directly." She looked at the room. "I opened the door because someone needed help. That's it. That's the whole answer. 6 men in my driveway at midnight in a blizzard with an unconscious rider. What was I going to do?" She paused. "The question I'd ask instead is, when did that become a question worth asking? When did we start needing a reason to help someone who needed help?" The room was very quiet. "Robert used to say," she continued, and the room adjusted slightly at the name, at the presence of the ranger. Everyone in Silver Creek over 40 had known that the moment you start calculating whether someone deserves your help before you give it, you have already made the wrong decision. Because deserve is a story you tell yourself after the fact. Need is what's standing in front of you right now. She looked at Frank Dolan as she said that. Frank was still looking at his hands, but his jaw had moved. "What Hunter and his foundation are doing for this town," Evelyn said, "is generous. It is genuinely generous, and I don't want anyone in this room to take it lightly. But I want you to understand that what started it was not 6 Hells Angels in a ditch. What started it was 25 years ago, when a man who wore a ranger uniform and didn't ask questions pulled someone out of a fire." She stopped. "And what keeps it going, what makes any of this mean anything, is not the money or the equipment or the shelter. It's whether we decide to be the kind of town that opens the door." She looked at the room. "Because the shelter won't help anyone if people don't know they're welcome in it. The food program won't work if people are too proud to come or too afraid someone will judge them for needing it. The training doesn't matter if we can't work next to someone who doesn't look like us or ride the same kind of vehicle." She looked at Hunter, at the 6 men standing along the wall behind him. "These men came to my door wearing the death head. I let them in. They fixed my house, and they may have saved my life." She let that sit for a moment. "And I would do it again tomorrow, because that's what this town should be. That's what I believe Silver Creek already is underneath whatever it's afraid of." The room held her words. Then Doug Haynes started clapping, and then it was everyone, the full 60 people, and Evelyn Harper stood in the middle of the fire department bay and accepted it with the composed dignity of a woman who knows the difference between praise and recognition and was willing to accept the latter because it was not for her alone. Hunter was not clapping. He was looking at her with an expression that had only one thing in it, and that thing was the specific gratitude of a person who has finally, after 25 years of trying, understood what it was they were supposed to do with what they were given. After the gathering, people stayed. They stayed in the particular way of communities that have been given permission to be what they already wanted to be. Talking to the bikers without the intermediary of assumption, asking Gloria about the food program, sign up, asking Doug about the shelter, timeline, asking Hunter questions that were practical and real, and came from the place of people who had decided they were going to be part of something rather than observers of it. Frank Dolan found Hunter at the edge of the room. "Monday," Frank said. "Monday," Hunter confirmed. Frank looked at the room, at the people talking to the bikers, At Ruth Ann refilling cups. At Gloria Ferris signing people up for volunteer slots with the energy of someone who has been waiting for exactly this for 11 years. She's something, Frank said, meaning Evelyn. Yes, Hunter said, she is. Frank was quiet for a moment. My father, he said, he stopped, started again. My father didn't trust strangers, taught me the same, said it kept you safe. He looked at his hands, the same gesture, as in the meeting, the physical habit of a man who processes things through his body. Kept me a lot of other things, too. Hunter said nothing. I'm thinking about that, Frank said. That's all, I'm thinking about it. That's enough, Hunter said. Frank nodded and went to find Clara, who he'd been avoiding all evening for reasons that probably made sense to him. Maya found Hunter near midnight when the gathering had finished and the fire department bay was being cleaned up and the bikers were loading things into trucks for the return drive in the morning. She told me something tonight, Maya said. After, when I helped her to Clara's car. What did she say? Hunter said. Maya looked at her father. She said she's been watching you all week, Maya said. The way you work, the way you talk to people, the way you listen. She paused. She said you remind her of Robert. Hunter was still. She said he had the same thing you have, Maya said. The way of moving through a situation like you've already decided the only question worth asking is what's needed. Not what's fair, not what's deserved, not what's convenient. Just what's needed. She held his gaze. She said Robert took 34 years to figure out what his life was for. She said she thinks you're doing better than that. Hunter looked at his daughter. His daughter looked at him. In the background, the work went on around them. The ordinary work of a group of people who had done something real together in a place that needed it, the clink and shuffle and conversation of the end of a long day, and outside Silver Creek sat under its December sky, getting ready for whatever winter still had to say. Come back at Christmas, Hunter said to Maya. I want to bring Evelyn something. I want you to be there. Maya looked at him for a moment. Yeah, she said, okay. She put her arm through his briefly the way she used to when she was small, and the world was something they moved through together, and then she let go and went to help with the loading. Because there was work to do, and Maya Mason did not stand next to work without doing it. Hunter watched her go. Then he went to find Evelyn, who was in the kitchen of the fire department, making sure the coffee carafe got back to Ruth Ann because Evelyn Harper did not leave a borrowed thing unreturned or a room untidier than she found it. You should be resting, he said. I'll rest when I'm dead, she said, which I'm told is no longer imminent. He looked at her. She looked back at him with a small, certain smile. Ben called this afternoon, she said. The blood work came back. Carbon monoxide levels were elevated. Not critically, but enough. She handed him the carafe. He said 6 more months with that exchanger and we'd be having a different conversation. I know, Hunter said. He told me. You talked to Ben. He called me, Hunter said. Yesterday, he said you gave him my number. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite innocent, but was doing a credible impression of it. Did I? You did, he said. Well, she said, someone had to be responsible. Hunter stood in the kitchen of the Silver Creek Volunteer Fire Department and looked at this woman, this 74-year-old woman, with her late husband's watch and her absolute unassailable certainty about what mattered, and felt the accumulation of everything the last 3 weeks had been settled into something he could carry. Evelyn, he said. Hunter, she said. We're coming back at Christmas. I'll put coffee on, she said. And I want to talk to you about something we've been discussing with the foundation, about the scholarship. He paused. We want to name it after Robert. Formally, a foundation scholarship for students pursuing emergency services. In his name. Evelyn was still. With your permission, Hunter said. She looked at the kitchen for a moment. Then she looked at him. Robert James Harper Memorial Scholarship, she said, as if she was hearing how it sounded. If you'll allow it, Hunter said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, he would have been mortified, she said. I know, Hunter said. He would have said it was unnecessary. I know that too. He would have been wrong, she said. Her voice was level, completely steady. He would have been wrong about that, and I would have told him so, and he would have pretended to grumble about it for 2 days. And then he would have been so proud he could barely stand himself. Hunter watched her face. Yes, she said, you have my permission. Outside in the December night, Silver Creek was quiet under its stars, and in the fire department's back section, the framing for the new warming shelter stood ready for Monday's insulation crew, and in Evelyn Harper's farmhouse, the heating system was running clean for the first time in 2 seasons, and in the church basement, 63 families were on a list for Saturday's first food distribution, and on a whiteboard in Marcy Delgado's office, the words Robert James Harper Memorial Scholarship had been written in permanent marker the day before waiting. Everything that had been set in motion by one woman opening one door at midnight was still moving, and it had barely begun. Christmas came to Silver Creek on a Friday, and the snow came with it. Not the catastrophic wall of the November blizzard. This was the other kind, the kind that arrives with intention rather than violence, steady and deep and certain of itself, the kind that by late afternoon had buried the town under 8 inches of new white and showed no sign of stopping before morning. The difference between this storm and the last one was not only in its temperament, the difference was in what Silver Creek had become in the 6 weeks between them. The warming shelter opened at 4 in the afternoon. Doug Haynes unlocked the door himself, which he had insisted on because some things needed to be done by the person who had waited longest for them. The insulation Frank Dolan had installed 2 weeks earlier held the heat with the efficiency of something built right, and the backup generator hummed in its housing with the particular solid reliability of equipment that had been properly maintained, which the shelter's generator had been from the day it arrived, because Doug Haynes did not do anything halfway, and his volunteer crew had adopted the same standard from watching him. The first person through the door was a man named Al Briggs, 78, who lived in a single wide at the east end of the county road and whose furnace had been unreliable since October. He came in with his hat in his hands and looked around the shelter with the careful expression of someone who is not sure whether they are welcome in a place or whether the invitation was theoretical. Gloria Ferris was there to meet him. "Al," she said, "sit down. There's coffee, and I made chili." He sat down. He took the coffee with both hands around the cup and said, "Gloria, this is something." "Yes," she said, "it is, and it's for you. That's the point." He nodded. He looked at the room around him, the space that had been a storage bay 3 weeks ago and was now something else entirely warm and lit and filled with the smell of food. He looked at the small plaque Frank Dolan had installed beside the door, the one that said Biscuit's Place with a small engraving of a beagle below the text, and he said, That's Biscuit," Gloria said. Al Briggs laughed, the full surprised laugh of a man who wasn't expecting to find something funny and is delighted by the discovery. "Good dog," he said. "The best," Gloria said. Doug cried at the dedication. "Doug will say he didn't. Doug will be wrong," she said. By 5 o'clock, there were 14 people in the shelter. By 6, there were 23. They came in ones and twos, and in one case, a whole family, the Garcias from the North End, mother and father, and 3 children, their heating oil having run out 2 days before payday, and each time the door opened, whoever was nearest got up and helped with coats and found seats and handed cups of coffee or hot chocolate depending on the age of the arrival. And the ease with which this happened, the naturalness of it, was the thing that Gloria would later say surprised her most. She had expected it to feel like charity. It felt like a kitchen. Hunter arrived at 6:15 with Maya and Rex and Crow and Bo, who had driven up from Colorado specifically for the Christmas visit because he had called his mother every day for 3 weeks and had told her about Silver Creek in enough detail that she had said, "Bo, you need to go back," and he had said, "I know, Mom," and she had said, "And I want to hear everything when you return," and he had said, "I know that too." Luke was not with them. Luke was in Louisville with his family for the first time in 4 years, because 3 weeks in a farmhouse bed, while a 74-year-old woman had quietly, without announcement, dismantled every excuse he had been carrying for the estrangement, had apparently been sufficient. He had called his mother the morning after the blizzard and had kept calling. He had taken the bus home in mid-December, and Hunter had gotten a text that said just, "She made biscuits," and Hunter had smiled at his phone and not replied because some things didn't need a reply. Evelyn was already in the shelter when Hunter arrived. She had come with Clara at 4:30, and in the hour and a half since she had done what Evelyn Harper did in every space she occupied, she had made herself useful in a way that was so natural and so continuous that you couldn't isolate it into specific actions. She had talked to Al Briggs for 20 minutes about his son in Oregon, and his furnace, and his garden in summer, And Al had left the conversation with better color in his face than he'd come in with. She had noticed when the Garcia children needed something to do and had organized them into a hot chocolate assembly line with an authority that the children accepted immediately and that made their parents' shoulders drop by half an inch. She had located the checkerboard in the supply cabinet and set it up at a corner table and found two old men who hadn't spoken to each other in 3 years over a property line dispute and had seated them across from each other with cups of coffee and simply walked away. Hunter found her at a coffee station. "You didn't save me any," he said. "The pot's full," she said. "Pour your own." He poured his own. They stood together and looked at the room at the 23 people and the warmth and the noise of people being together and safe on a night when their alternative was isolation and cold. And Evelyn's expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more certain than triumph. It was the expression of a woman looking at something that has arrived at exactly the shape it was always supposed to have. "Robert would have been here," she said. "He would have been at that door all night, making sure no one drove past without being waved in." "I know," Hunter said. "He would have known Al Briggs's furnace situation before October," she said. "He would have showed up with parts." "I know that too." She looked at him sideways. "Stop agreeing with me so much. It's suspicious." He smiled. "Maya told me to agree with you more. She said it was better for everyone." Evelyn looked across the room at Maya, who was on the floor with the Garcia children, apparently teaching the youngest one a card game with the patient, focused attention of a woman who was going to be an extraordinary doctor. "I like that girl," Evelyn said. "I know," Hunter said. "She told me." She said it in a way that implied I should take credit for it, and then immediately clarified that she did it herself. "She's right on both counts," Evelyn said. Hunter drank his coffee. "Claire's coming in January," he said, "my foundation director. She wants to sit with Gloria for 2 days and go through the expansion plan for the food program. Gloria already sent her a 40-page document." "Gloria doesn't do anything at less than full speed," Evelyn said. Claire said it was the most comprehensive intake she'd received from a community partner in 8 years. Evelyn smiled. "Give Gloria the tools," she said. "Get out of the way." "Precisely the strategy," Hunter said. The door opened, and Frank Dolan came in with his wife Patricia, who had been dragging him to community events for 30 years with variable success and who had apparently decided that this one was not optional, and Frank had apparently agreed because he had put on a clean shirt and a jacket that Evelyn recognized as the good one he saved for occasions he considered serious. He saw Evelyn and came directly to her. "House is holding up," he said. "Perfectly," she said. "The chimney hasn't leaked a drop." "Good pie," he said. He looked around the shelter. He looked at the plaque by the door. His jaw moved slightly. "The insulation's right," he said. "You won't have heat loss issues. That back wall might need attention in a few years, but not before." "Thank you, Frank," she said. He nodded. He moved his weight from one foot to the other in the way he did when he wanted to say something else and was deciding whether to say it. "Frank," she said gently. "I've been thinking about what you said at the meeting," he said, "about the door, about what kind of town we want to be." She waited. "I think I've been deciding some things based on information I got a long time ago," he said. He was looking at the shelter, not at her, and I think some of that information was wrong. Or at least, he stopped. Incomplete. "That's very honest of you," she said. "Patricia has been saying the same thing for 20 years, but," he said. "I didn't need to hear it from you too, but it landed differently." "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because you actually did it," he said. "You didn't just believe it. You opened the door, in the middle of the night, in a blizzard, with everything you had." He looked back at the room. "That's not a philosophy. That's a fact. And it's harder to argue with facts than philosophies." Evelyn looked at Frank Dolan. This man she had known for 30 years. This man who had shown up with chimney flashing and no explanation, who had insulated a shelter and filed it under practical necessity, who was now standing in that shelter on Christmas Eve, telling her the truth about himself in the most uncomfortable and therefore most sincere way available to him. "You've been living it too," she said. "You just don't like to call it what it is." He looked at her. "The flashing," she said, "the insulation, $40 of materials and a whole day of your time." She held his gaze. "What would you call that, Frank, if it's not opening a door?" He looked at the floor. "Patricia calls it showing up," he said. She says that's always been my problem. I show up for things I don't have words for. Patricia, Evelyn said, is a very wise woman. Don't tell her that, Frank said. She's already insufferable about being right. Evelyn laughed the full, genuine laugh that came from deep in her chest, the one that Clara said was the best sound in the county, and Frank Dolan looked at her for a moment with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something younger. Something that had been under the surface for a while and had just found a crack in the facade to come through. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn," he said. "Merry Christmas, Frank," she said. He went to find Patricia and a cup of chili, and Evelyn watched him go with the specific satisfaction of a woman who has seen something complete itself. At 7:30, the door opened, and the storm outside made itself briefly present, a gust of cold and snow announcing the arrival before anyone stepped through, and then Carl Whitmore came in with his wife and their youngest, a girl of about 10, who immediately identified the Garcia children and moved toward them with the unerring social navigation of a child who knows how to make friends and does it. Carl came to Hunter. "How's the road?" Hunter said. "Passable," Carl said. "For now, another 4 hours of this and it'll be Route 12 all over again." He looked at the room. "You should have seen Doug's face when he unlocked that door this afternoon." "I heard," Hunter said. "He cried," Carl said. "I heard that too." "He'll deny it." "I know." Carl poured himself a coffee. He stood beside Hunter in the way of two men who have arrived at a mutual understanding through the most reliable route available, which is events rather than conversation. "We got a call today," Carl said, "from the Cascade County Sheriff's Department. They heard about what's happening here. They want to talk to you about whether something like this could work over there." Hunter looked at him. "Word travels," Carl said. "Apparently," Hunter said. "Marcy's already fielded 2 calls from other small towns," Carl said. "She sent them to Gloria, who sent them a 40-page document, which I'm told is going around the region's emergency services network." Hunter looked at Gloria Ferris across the room, who was organizing a table of food with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting her whole career to be properly resourced and is not wasting a single moment of it. "Gloria Ferris is going to change the entire region," Hunter said. "Gloria Ferris," Carl said, "has been trying to change this county for 11 years. The difference is she's got fuel now." Hunter drank his coffee and held that thought. What had started in one woman's farmhouse on one night was moving. Not loudly, not in ways that made the news, or not yet, but in the persistent, comprehensive way that real things move when they have been properly started. One community calling another. One emergency services coordinator forwarding a document. One frank conversation between 2 deputies who had both been thinking about the same gap in their systems. The wave that Evelyn Harper had put in motion by opening her door was still traveling outward. Across the room, Maya Garcia had folded herself into a chair next to old Al Briggs and was listening to him talk about his son with the quality of attention that was going to make her a remarkable doctor. Not the attention that awaits for the medical detail, but the attention that understands the medical detail only exists inside the human detail. And you have to hear both or you've heard neither. Bo was in the corner talking to Frank Dolan's wife, Patricia, and Patricia was talking with her hands in the way of a woman who has found an audience. And Bo was listening with the specific expression of a young man who is receiving information that is going to stay with him. Every few minutes, Bo laughed, or Patricia laughed, or both of them did, and the sound of it moved through the shelter like something that belonged there. Crow was helping Doug with the generator check, and the two of them were deep in a technical conversation that had started about generators and migrated into structural engineering, and had now apparently arrived at a shared opinion about the county's general attitude toward infrastructure maintenance, which they were expressing to each other with the passionate fluency of 2 men who had been waiting their whole lives to meet someone who agreed with them about this specific thing. Rex was standing by the door. He was not talking to anyone. He was just watching. Rex had a way of being in a room that was different from how the other men were in a room he occupied, the perimeter, the edge, the place from which you could see everything without being in the middle of a Yesidim. It was a habit from years of riding, of always knowing the exits, always reading the room's temperature before the room knew its temperature had changed. What he was watching was Evelyn Harper. She had moved from the coffee station to the checker table where the 2 old men had apparently resolved enough of their 3-year property line enmity to be playing actual checkers with something approaching enjoyment, and now she was somewhere between them and the Garcia table, and she was doing the thing that Rex had watched her do all night. She was noticing. She was noticing the woman in the corner whose cup had been empty for 20 minutes and who hadn't gotten up to refill it, and she was filling a cup and bringing it over without being asked. She was noticing the little girl who was Carl's daughter, who had made friends with the Garcia children, but was now standing slightly to the side with the particular expression of a child whose energy has outrun her courage, and she was crossing to her and bending to say something, and the girl laughed. She was noticing everything. Rex had grown up in a house where nobody noticed anything. His mother had worked 2 jobs and come home too tired to see, and his father had not been consistent enough in his presence to have developed the habit, and he had learned very early that noticing was something you either found a way to do for yourself or went without. He had ridden long enough with Hunter to know that noticing was something you could learn, that it was less a gift than a practice, but he had never seen it done with the seamless naturalness with which Evelyn Harper did it, as if not noticing would require more effort than noticing. He thought about Patricia Reyes, his mother who had died 6 years ago, and who he had told Evelyn about on the porch of this woman's farmhouse in November, and who Evelyn had called by name and said had raised a good man, which was the most specifically right thing anyone had ever said to him about her, and which he had been carrying since with a care that said something about how rarely he'd been given things worth carrying carefully. He thought Patricia would have liked this room. He thought Patricia would have been that woman refilling the cup before it was asked for. He thought maybe that's what she was trying to show me, and I was too young and too angry to see it. Evelyn appeared at his elbow. He hadn't seen her come. She had just arrived the way she arrived at things, without announcement, without the preamble that most people needed before they could be present somewhere. "You've been standing here for an hour," she said. "Thinking," he said. "About what?" He looked at the room. "About what this is," he said. "What it actually is. Not the shelter, not the program. Just," he gestured, "this." Evelyn looked at the room with him. "What do you think it is?" she said. He thought about it. "It's what happens," he said slowly, "when someone refuses to be afraid. It just—" He paused. "It spreads, like you did it, and then Hunter did it, and then the town started to do it, and now it's going to other counties, and—" He stopped. "I'm not explaining it right." "You're explaining it perfectly," she said. He looked at her. "Courage is contagious," she said. "That's all. Most people don't know that because they're waiting to see it in someone else first. They need the proof. Once they have the proof—" She shrugged. "They find out they were capable of it all along. They just needed to see it done." Rex was quiet. "My mother knew that," he said. "She just lived it, every day, without making a thing of it." "The best ones always do," Evelyn said. He looked at his coffee cup. "Patricia Reyes," Evelyn said, just the name, the way she had said it on the porch weeks ago with the full weight of the name of a person who mattered. "Yeah," he said. "She's in this room," Evelyn said. "In what you do, in the way you watch out for people, in the way you stood at that door in November and carried Luke inside before anyone asked you to." She held his gaze. "The people who show us how to be, they don't leave. They just change address." Rex looked at the room. He held that for a long time. "Thank you," he said, "and meant it the way you mean something when you have no other words, and you know the ones you're using are insufficient, and you say them anyway because the alternative is silence, and silence here would be wrong." "Don't thank me," she said. "Call your people, whatever family you have left. Tonight if you can." He looked at her. "It's Christmas Eve," she said, "and life is genuinely short. I have documentation." He laughed, the surprise, full laugh that Evelyn seemed to produce in people by simply saying the true thing at the exact right moment. He pulled out his phone. He had a brother in Albuquerque he hadn't spoken to in 14 months over a thing that neither of them could fully articulate anymore. He looked at the number. He thought about the 14 months, and then he thought about Bo calling his mother from a porch in a blizzard, and Luke getting on a bus to Louisville, and Frank Dolan showing up with chimney flashing and not a single word of explanation. He called his brother. It rang 3 times, and then a voice answered that he hadn't heard in 14 months, and the first thing his brother said was, "Rex, man, it's Christmas Eve." "I know," Rex said. "Where are you?" "Timmy, Montana," Rex said. "Small town called Silver Creek. I want to tell you about it." A pause. "Tell me," his brother said. Rex walked to the quieter corner of the shelter and told him. At 8:15, the storm made its first serious move of the evening. The power went out. Not a flicker, a clean cut, the kind that meant a line down somewhere in the system, the kind that in November had meant darkness and cold throughout the whole county. The shelter went dark for exactly 4 seconds. Then the backup generator kicked on with the solid, reliable rumble of a machine that had been installed correctly and maintained properly, and the lights came back up and the shelter held its warmth without interruption. Nobody panicked. A few people startled. The Garcia children looked up from their cards with wide eyes. Al Briggs put his coffee cup down carefully. Carl Whitmore's daughter grabbed her new friend's arm, and her new friend grabbed back. Doug Haynes put his hand flat on the generator panel and felt the vibration of it working and let out a breath that had been held. It seemed since the moment he'd seen the power authorization letter 3 weeks ago. "It's holding," he said, to no one specifically and everyone generally. "Of course it's holding," Frank Dolan said from across the room with the professional certainty of someone who doesn't build things that don't hold. I insulated it." The room laughed. The tension broke completely into the pure relief of people who have been afraid of something and found out they didn't need to be. And that specific relief, that particular quality of a community discovering it, has become capable of handling what it used to fear was better than any speech. Hunter looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. "Robert would have said something right now," she said. "Something exactly right. He always knew what to say when a room needed a word." "What would he have said?" Hunter asked. She thought about it. "He would have said, 'See, we built it right.'" Hunter looked at the room, at the generator running clean, at the shelter full of people warm and safe on a night that the November version of Silver Creek would have left them cold and alone, at Frank Dolan with his professional certainty and his recently unclenched jaw, at Doug Haynes with his hand on the panel and his eyes bright, at Gloria Ferris making sure Al Briggs had enough chili, at Maya on the floor with the children, at Crow and Rex and Bo dispersed through the room like they'd always been here. "See," he said quietly to the room and to the photograph in Evelyn's farmhouse, and to a forest ranger who had walked half a mile through smoke carrying a stupid 23-year-old who didn't deserve it. "We built it right." At 9 o'clock, Carl got a call. He stepped away to take it and came back 2 minutes later with an expression that was familiar to anyone who knew what it meant when a law enforcement officer came back from a phone call with their professional face on. He found Hunter. "Route 12, he said. "A car went off the road about 2 miles east. Family. The dispatch says a woman and a young boy. Car is off the shoulder and they can't get it out. She's been there for about 40 minutes. Hunter was already moving. "Roads are bad," Carl said. "My deputy is en route, but he's coming from the west side. It'll be 20 minutes. "I can do it in 10, Hunter said. He turned. Rex. Rex was already at his side. "We can't take the bikes in this," Hunter said. "Whose truck is out front?" "Mine," Frank Dolan said. Everyone looked at him. He had his keys in his hand. "I heard," he said simply. "Let's go." Frank, Hunter, and Rex went out into the storm. The door closed behind them and the shelter held its warmth and its people and its generator hum. And inside, Evelyn Harper stood very still for a moment. And then she went to the supply cabinet and pulled out 2 wool blankets, heavy ones, the kind the shelter had stocked from the supply list Hunter's Foundation had provided, and she brought them to the door and handed them to Doug Haynes, who had appeared beside her. "When they come back," she said. "When they come back," he said. He held the blankets ready. The minutes stretched. Inside the shelter, the room had recalibrated itself around the knowledge that something was happening outside it. Not panic, but the specific, alerted attention of a community that has been given the tools to respond and is now feeling the weight of whether it can. Gloria moved to the coffee station and made a fresh pot. Carl's wife gathered the children to the checker table and started a story about nothing in particular in a voice calibrated to calm. Al Briggs sat very straight in his chair with his hands wrapped around his cup and his eyes on the door. 11 minutes after Frank's truck left, headlights appeared through the shelter window. The door opened. Frank came in first carrying a small boy of about 5 who was wrapped in his jacket and pressed against Frank's chest with the boneless, trusting weight of a child who has decided this large person is safe and has committed completely to the decision. The boy's eyes were open. He was not crying. He was looking around the shelter with the wide, absorbing attention of a child for whom the world is still a place where extraordinary things happen regularly. Behind Frank came Hunter with his arm around a young woman who could not have been more than 25. dark-haired, moving with the careful steps of someone who has been cold for a long time and is not yet sure her body has returned to full cooperation. Her coat was wet through, and she was shaking in the deep muscle way that went past surface cold. Behind Hunter came Rex carrying 2 bags from the car's back seat. Doug Haynes stepped forward with the blankets. The young woman stopped in the middle of the room and looked around it at the warmth and the light, and the 60 people who had looked up from what they were doing when the door opened, and her face did the thing that faces do when relief arrives too fast to manage. Her jaw worked. Her eyes filled. "You're okay," Doug said. He put the blanket around her shoulders with the practiced gentleness of a man who has done this before and understands that the right move is the blanket first and the words after. "You're inside, you're safe, the car will wait." She pressed her lips together hard. "My son," she started. "He's here," Frank said from 2 feet away, where the boy was now examining Frank's beard with the critical interest of a 5-year-old who has opinions about beards. "He's excellent, actually. I think he wants to run the place." The young woman made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but contained both. "My name is Rachel," she said. "Rachel Tran. My GPS said the road was clear and it obviously wasn't, and I tried to back out, but the snow—" "GPS lies," Al Briggs said from his chair with the weary authority of a man who has been betrayed by GPS and mountain conditions on multiple occasions. "Always has." Rachel Tran looked at the room full of strangers who had produced blankets and coffee and a large man to carry her son without being asked any questions about whether she deserved it, and something in her that had been held very rigid since the car went sideways gave way completely. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't usually—" "Don't apologize," Evelyn said. She had appeared at Rachel's elbow in the way she appeared at elbows, without announcement, without theater. She put her hand on the young woman's arm and held it with the specific pressure of someone communicating something that words would make smaller. "You're in the right place," Evelyn said. "You both are. That's all that matters." Rachel Tran looked at the woman in the cardigan with the late husband's watch on her wrist, this small, certain white-haired woman who had put her hand on a stranger's arm at 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve, with the ease of someone to whom strangers were simply people she hadn't yet had the chance to know. "Thank you," she said. "Sit down," Evelyn said. "Warm up. There's chili and there's hot chocolate, and that man over there," she gestured at Al Briggs, "will tell you everything that's wrong with mountain GPS systems for as long as you can stand it, which I find is actually quite soothing." Al Briggs raised his cup in acknowledgement. Rachel Tran sat down. Her son climbed off Frank Dolan's arm and onto the chair next to his mother and leaned against her and looked at the room with the expression of a child who has decided this is good and intends to stay. Frank stood in the middle of the shelter and looked at the boy and looked at Evelyn, and then he looked at Hunter, who was standing at the edge of the room with his jacket wet and his boots snowy and his face carrying the specific expression of a man who has just done a small thing that is part of a large thing and understands the relationship. Frank walked to him. He put out his hand. Hunter shook it. No words. The handshake was the sentence, and the sentence said everything it needed to say about where Frank Dolan had started 3 weeks ago and where he was standing now in a shelter he had insulated with his own hands on a night when it mattered. Hunter held the grip for a moment. Then Frank went to get coffee, and Hunter went to stand with Evelyn, and they stood together the way they had stood in the fire department parking lot on the day of the meeting, and in the kitchen of the farmhouse at dawn, and in a dozen intermediate places over the 6 weeks since November, with the ease of 2 people who have recognized something in each other that does not require constant explanation. "It's working," Hunter said. "Of course it's working," she said. "You're not surprised." "I'm never surprised," she said, "when people are given the chance to be what they actually are." Hunter looked at Rachel Tran, who was drinking hot chocolate with both hands wrapped around the cup and her son asleep against her shoulder, with the complete confidence of a child who has decided the world is safe. He looked at Frank, who was talking to Doug, with the animation of 2 men who have found genuine common ground. He looked at Gloria, who had Rachel's bags open and was already figuring out what Rachel needed. He looked at Maya and Bo and Crow and Rex and Carl and Ruth Ann and Al Briggs and the Garcia family and 60 people in a room that had not existed 8 weeks ago. He thought about a drainage ditch in a forest, a ranger's hands on his arm, a sentence that had followed him for 25 years. "You have used up considerable luck today. I'd suggest not wasting what's left of it." He had not wasted it. He hadn't known in 1998 what not wasting it would look like. He had spent years thinking not wasting it meant becoming something, building something, earning something, making himself into a person who justified the effort of being saved. And those things had been true enough as far as they went. But standing in this shelter on Christmas Eve, in a small Montana town, he understood for the first time the full shape of what the sentence had meant. Not wasting it meant this, not the company or the foundation or the contracts or the capacity. This specific room, this woman beside him, Rachel Tran's son asleep on his mother's shoulder, Frank Dolan's handshake, Rex on the phone with his brother in the corner, a beagle named Biscuit on a plaque by the door. He had been trying to become worthy of one act of grace for 25 years, and grace, it turned out, was not a debt you repaid. It was a direction you traveled. And the direction was always outward, always toward the person who needed the door opened, always past the calculation of whether they deserved it into the clearer, simpler territory of whether they needed it. Evelyn had known that her whole life. Robert had known it. Now Silver Creek knew it. "Evelyn," Hunter said. "Hunter," she said, "I want to tell you something." She turned to look at him. "When I drove away from that ranger station in 1998, he said, I sat in the parking lot for a long time, and I thought about turning myself in. I thought about a lot of things. And then I thought," he stopped. "I thought if that man could go back in for someone like me, then maybe there's something in someone like me worth going back in for." He held her gaze. "That's what he gave me. Not just the rescue, the premise, the idea that I was worth the effort." Evelyn looked at him. Her face was very still. "He knew that," she said. "He always knew that about the people he helped. He said the ones that seemed the least worth it were usually the ones who needed the idea most, the idea that they were worth someone's trouble." She pressed her lips together once. "He would be," she stopped. "I know," Hunter said. "He would be so." "I know," he said again, gently. She collected herself in the quick, complete way. She collected herself, no performance of it, just a breath and a return. "He'd also say you're being too sentimental," she said, "and that there's chili getting cold and you should eat something." "He'd be right," Hunter said. "He usually was," she said. She went to get him a bowl without asking if he wanted one because Evelyn Harper did not ask questions, to which the answer was obvious. And Hunter watched her cross the shelter floor with the bowl in her hands and thought about a woman who had been alone in a farmhouse for 11 years with a leaking roof and a cracked heat exchanger and an empty pantry delivering food to neighbors who needed it more. Putting a candle in the window because it was the right thing to do, opening the door at midnight because no one dies outside her house. He thought about the size of that, the daily, undramatic, unphotographed, unwitnessed size of it, the choosing it not once but every day, without an audience, without recognition, without knowing that it was accumulating into something that would eventually be large enough to change a town and reach into other counties and put a beagle's name on a door. Doing the right thing, Robert Harper had told a 23-year-old in a parking lot, is not something you do when it's convenient. It's something you do when it's the only thing left that makes sense. And Silver Creek on this Christmas Eve, with its shelter full and its generator running and its people fed and warm and next to each other rather than alone in the cold, had become a town that understood what that meant. Not because of Hunter, though. Hunter had carried the resources and the intent and the 25-year debt of a rescued man paying forward what he owed. Not because of the foundation or the partnership or the equipment or the scholarships, though all of those things were real and mattered and would matter for years beyond this night. Because of one woman who had put a candle in a window and opened a door and said without hesitation, without calculation, without once asking whether it was wise or safe or what anyone would think, "No one dies outside my house." That was the thing that had started it. That was the thing that was still going. And when Rachel Tran's son woke up 20 minutes later and looked around the warm room full of strangers who had given him hot chocolate and a blanket and a large bearded man willing to let him examine his beard, and said to his mother, "Mom, these people are nice." And Rachel Tran said, "Yes, baby, they really are." Evelyn Harper heard it from across the room and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Some things are not conclusions. They are proofs. Silver Creek, Montana was a proof, the living, breathing generator, humming, chili-serving, door-opening proof that one person choosing to be unafraid is enough to show a whole community what it's capable of, and that what a community is capable of once it knows is more than any blizzard can undo. Evelyn Harper had opened the door. Everything else was what walked in.